Draxx's prison. There sat a girl with her head down. Suddenly, a very handsome guy approached her and said that he needed her help. The girl immediately beamed and said that she was completely at his disposal. The guy said that he should become emperor. The girl was surprised. It seemed like he was planning a rebellion or something worse. The Hexen Empire already has a current emperor as well as a crown prince ready to ascend to the throne. The current emperor's younger brother, third in line to the throne. He comes immediately after the prince and his brother, despite the fact that there are two strong contenders in front of him. They can be gotten rid of quite easily. The girl giggled shyly and noted that he was after all a Grand Duke. The gentleman noted that it seemed that some rumors about him had already reached her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have laughed right in his face. The girl confirmed this. She asked again if there was anyone in the empire who had not heard of him. He is invulnerable, the beast of the borderland, the black wolf of the battlefield, the might of the empire, and the shame of the imperial family of Hexen, whose brain is even made of muscles. This is Rexed van Hexen. In someone so aggressive and cruel, he, a person, will not see a drop of elegance and restraint inherent in members of the imperial family. Even if you put on rose-colored glasses. Actions, not words, cruelty, not law. Even though he was a nobleman, no woman would dare to propose marriage to him. To top it all off, the now calm emperor had given him the borderland of the empire, the land of Draxx, located in the cold north. A subtle hint that his place is only among wild animals, nothing more than an attempt to throw the source of shame out of the imperial family. However, Rexed van Hexen really did put all his efforts into the work assigned to him, since the borders of the empire, which were under the strict supervision of the Grand Duke, were never captured. In conclusion, the girl can say that the man in front of her simply has no chance of becoming an emperor. In its entire history, this world has never known such ignorant leaders, especially those who had nothing but strength. The leaders were smart and cunning. They got everything they wanted as soon as they opened their mouths a few times. The gentleman noted that he probably knew that she knew that he had air in his head, and the girl noted with a smile that his head was clearly empty. Rexed said that he needed her to work her head for him since she had something. Now the girl understood why he came to her. She didn't understand how a pathetic, petty criminal like her could even in theory help the Grand Duke become emperor. Rexed noted that he had heard that even though she led a life of crime and deceived others into giving her money, she was surprisingly smart. But the girl began to say that these were just rumors, so there was no need to exaggerate. The gentleman noted that whether it was true or not, she had to make him emperor. Either she agreed or she died. After all, she was a criminal sentenced to death. The girl noted that he was right after all, because he was saying that he would get her out of here, and she would do everything in her power. The Duke confirmed this, and the girl understood that she didn't even have a choice. Even though her talents are trivial, she does everything she can to help His Majesty. He likes how quick she is at catching on, and he will personally make sure that she is rewarded handsomely if everything goes well. If she wishes, he can give her her own lands and provide her with enough money to live the rest of her life in luxury. The girl was grateful to him, and the gentleman said that he would pick her up at dawn. He will take her not as a prisoner, but not as one sentenced to death, but as his tactician. She will leave this prison with honor. The girl thanked him with a smile. She looked happy, but she thought she seemed to be going crazy. After he left, she thought that he was really coming. Maybe he did have a brain, but somehow it turns out that it would have been better without him. She didn't understand at all how he, with such a head, even thought of finding her. It was surprisingly clever of him to approach her, but she was sure that was where his intellect ended. It is not entirely clear why one should waste time on someone whom the emperor did not like. However, the girl cannot just sit and wait for execution, so she must follow him at least for now. Well, suddenly she thought that these were some very depressing monologues for starters. She pretended that she was arrested and entered Draxx's prison. This was done completely deliberately. She is not like everyone else. And then at dawn, she was still going to run away. In her past life, she lived in a completely different world where she tried everything she could. Assistant at a prestigious university, financial manager, employee of an insurance company, secretary to the chairman for a huge company, used car salesman, and so on. All of these jobs had something in common. Each of them involved fraud. The first scam I ever committed was a fake application to a prestigious university. The reason was simple. She was simply interested in student life. After that, she pulled off all sorts of scams, both big and small. She eventually became a first-class con artist, and wanted posters were posted all over the country. And yet the government was too stupid, short-sighted, and helpless in its attempts to catch her. With a small amount of makeup and the ability to manage her status, she lived like a con artist, leaving no trace. Under the larvae of a financial manager who is married to the chairman of a large company, a mansion, expensive cars, jewelry, she simply bathed in luxury. Her fraudulent life was everything, but she quickly got tired of it. She did not sell part of the chairman's shares, they're under her own name. She then used the money she earned to swim across the sea and find shelter, intending to start a new life. But then she got her first taste of failure. People tend to lose sight of the fact that murder is a simple thing. But not for ordinary people, but for the chairman of a corporation that is above the laws. It was here that she made her calculations, and it was here that her short life, which lasted only 28 years, was cut short thanks to the efforts of the enraged corporate assassins. Send. The girl doesn't even really want to remember her death because it's creepy. However, that was the price of being a parasite on someone else, so she humbly accepted death. And when she opened her eyes, it was already in another world. If she had been born into a wealthy family, she would not have had to return to life as a swindler. But she doesn't understand why. Again, perhaps she was a deceiver in her past life, but she had a conscience. She only exploited bad people who did evil things. However, she is grateful that she at least retains the memory of her past life, and she is glad that her resourceful head remains with her. So after her reincarnation, she became a swindler again. And she's 21. Again, she's now a criminal again. The world in which the main character was reborn was very different from her past. It reminded her of the Western Middle Ages. And although their study of science did not go far, it was compensated by magic. It is worth noting that human life by the standards of her world was worth almost nothing here. If a peasant without money or power committed a crime, he could be executed on the spot. But despite all the difficulties being a criminal, here is even more interesting. If you have enough money, then it's easy to get useful magical tools for your scams. The girl was slowly preparing to make a name for herself and become the most famous swindler in this world. She learned local customs, studied the etiquette of the nobility, and learned to make a potion for self-defense. She also took advantage of her skills in using cosmetics from her past life, constantly changing her personality throughout time. Why did the girl start saving the money she got from her scams? And at this point, he has achieved the status of a first-class criminal, a death row inmate known as the faceless con artist. Of course, it's funny that there is no face on her wanted poster, but the inhabitants of the empire are terrified of Ali. Heard her name, but an agreement was written about her title of genius of the art of deception. So she wondered if the Grand Duke himself would visit her in prison to ask her criminal to become his tactician if he had a choice. He then said that she would definitely have to help him. She even became curious whether she could turn this narrow-minded individual into an emperor. But that's where it all ended. Unfortunately, she's not one of those who wastes time on meaningless nonsense that's not worth a penny. So now is finally the time to escape. She has an hour and a half before the next guard passes through here. This should be enough to take advantage of it. The devices used throughout the prison are mostly made of an alloy containing a large amount of a metal called aluminum. Cheap golomin is easy to confuse and has a low melting point, so if she holds him like this for a little while, then he can become the key with which she can open her legs. Escape from prisons very simply. Voila! and the key is ready. Now, high-risk prisoners are kept in solitary confinement cells with no toilet, so she had to use this hole. But thanks to the pumping system connected to the cell of each especially dangerous prisoner, escape becomes a reality. Morning, 7 before noon, noon evening, 9 afternoon. At this time, water is supplied to the pipes in order to wash away impurities. She needs to escape before 7 if she doesn't want to drown in feces. She had already said goodbye to Draxx's damned prison. She also remembered that she had simply forgotten to say goodbye to the Grand Duke. She wished him to become emperor as he wanted, and to rule long and idly. The most wanted criminal in the Hexen Empire is called Viper. Maybe she got this name because of her talents with poisons, her unrivaled success in the art of deception. Even though she's a little stuck up, he likes her eyes. Who would have thought that under the guise of a viper, there is a young girl who was probably a child not long ago? The Duke asked if she was really as smart as they said. The servant noted that of course this was true. She had been wanted for disturbing the peace in the Empire for 4 years already. This is the butler, Owen Schwach. Since she is so handy for money, she will work hard if they offer a good amount. The butler remarked that he thought that was indeed the case, but only if they could offer her more than she was getting from her scams. However, if they take her with them, the Duke must never trust her. He can trust anyone in this world, but not a viper. The Duke asked again how many more times the butler intended to repeat this because he understood it the first time. He is simply concerned about the personality and His Majesty, and the tendency to turn a blind eye to the actions of those whom he considers his people. The butler tried to say something again, but the Duke interrupted him and asked how he was supposed to understand it. When they approached her cell, they saw that it was open, and there were many officers nearby. They were in complete horror when they saw His Highness before them. The man went inside and saw that there was an open hatch and her shackles. The Duke demanded an explanation of what the hell had happened here. The men immediately bowed their heads and reported that the viper had most likely escaped. The Duke turned to the butler and asked him to find out how she escaped and report it to him. He hoped it wasn't because one of the guards had stolen a key. Owen asked the gentleman not to rush to conclusions. Everything could be much different. The butler walked over to the fork on the floor and said it looked like she had melted it and used it as a key. This is probably how she opened the shackles and the drain grate. This means that she didn't punish the key, she was still able to escape. He still wants to hear an explanation of how the viper ended up with the tableware. It's a big question how someone could steal sharp instruments, considering that there are magical metal detectors placed all over the building. The guard tried to say that he checked, and there were no problems with the detector at all. The Duke asked again whether the viper had really passed through him yesterday. The guard hesitated when he heard that the gentleman was asking about yesterday's detector. He started with the lantern, but basically she passed through it. But when it lit up red, then he asked her what was going on and asked what she was doing there. But the girl didn't understand at all what he meant. There was no way she could have carried something through the detector, so she didn't understand why she should try. And then she noticed that she had completely forgotten that she had tied her hair with a spoon. She apologized and said that her hair was just in the way while she was eating. And from this, she completely forgot that she had stabbed them with a spoon. The guard was, of course, surprised, but now he understood what the matter was. If she was trying to steal something, she would have taken a fork or a knife, but not a spoon. My city told her to be more careful next time. He said he was sure he had taken the spoon from her. There was no way she could have returned it. It looks like she deliberately put the spoon in her hair to distract the guards. Even if she were 100 times a viper, there was no way she could bypass a working metal detector without first turning it off. She hid the fork she had decided to steal somewhere on her body. In this way, she deceived the guards by chaining them with a spoon in order to blame the alarm on her. The Duke and the guard were in shock. They did not expect this. The Duke laughed and felt very amused by this. He noticed that this girl was really something. Just like Owen said, she's not the one who's going to deal with the idea of being executed soon. That is exactly it, but the Duke is interested in something else. He asked why the Viper was caught in his lands. She carried out her activities so carefully and meticulously that her identity could not be established for 4 years. But suddenly someone began to shout and appeal to His Highness. It was other guards who wanted him to order their execution. The Duke did not understand what the matter was and asked again. The guard reported that His Majesty's treasure had been stolen from the safe in the basement. The Duke became a little nervous and asked if he meant his ring. The blue mineral symbolizes the noble line of the Imperial family. This is an elfer. Every time a member of the Imperial family is born, he is given a ring or bracelet decorated with an elfer. The fact that such a treasure cannot be lost is obvious. The Imperial family will value these gifts no less than their lives. They give them various magical abilities and hide them in the most unexpected places. But now such a gift has disappeared. The butler noted that he now understood everything. This meant that she came here for the treasures of the Imperial family. The reason she revealed her personal information was because she needed to get into Draxx's prison. The Viper deliberately allowed herself to be captured so that she could be brought here to the ring. The Duke would never have thought that a person could be so brilliant. The butler noted that the gentleman had heard what he had said to him. If he had not prepared protective measures, it would have been terrible. Earlier, the gentleman was shocked by some kind of enchantment. He said it was a spell created to prevent slaves from escaping. The use of poison, made from the master's blood, is the principle of the bond between the master and the slave. The moment the owner activates the enchantment, the slave experiences terrible suffering. He instinctively returns to where his master is. The Duke noted that there must be trust between the employer and the employee. If he treats her like a slave, going so far as to use enchantment on her, then there is no chance that the Viper will trust and help him. The butler noted that he was so concerned about the rights of other people that it was hard to tell that during the war he personally killed non-soldiers. The Duke noted that he simply did not understand that was something else. The butler remarked that he understood perfectly well what he was trying to say, but alas, there was nothing more they could do. Viper will never join them unless they force her. He is sure of it. Even if they are lucky enough, we won't be able to catch her again. She will just find another way to escape. The Duke had no intention of going that far, but it looked like he would have to. Finally, the main character was able to breathe a sigh of relief. This ring was so damn beautiful soon. She would run away with this ring straight to Eisenbach. Eisenbach thrives on the sale of magical stones they mine. Now that she has the Imperial treasure, her next legend will be the illegitimate child of the Hexen Empire. Then she will contact the royal family of Eisenbach in Tanya and reveal her identity to them. She can already imagine what kind of face the Grand Duke will have when he realizes that the ring is missing. But suddenly she felt very ill and fell to the ground. She squeezed the grass with her hands because of the pain and believed that it was poison. Most likely the paralysis causing Schiffen or Peraltin. Schiffen causes immediate death when consumed. Peraltin also. But these are rare poisonous plants. The girl won't die, that's for sure. She developed resistance to poisons, consumed them in small doses, but when she could have been poisoned by something is completely unclear. She began to believe that the poison was mixed into the food they gave her in prison. It was colorless and tasteless. She didn't notice anything, and the food didn't have a specific smell, so it was definitely not Schiffen. But if it's Peraltin, then her body will soon be completely paralyzed, and she will hardly be able to blink normally. Her body moves on its own. She doesn't understand when this will happen. When she crawled to someone's feet, the pain stopped. When she looked up, she saw the Duke in front of her, asking where she was going. The girl began to worry, because in front of her was Rexed Van Hessen himself. It was worth suspecting something was wrong when they grabbed her with such ease, but he was not a fan of thinking ahead, so he did not expect this. Who would have thought that her motive was the Imperial treasure? The girl began to laugh and remarked that it was very pretty. He noted that he didn't think she stole him just because of his beauty. I wondered what else she might need it for. And he noted that however she could keep it for herself. After that, he put a ring on her ring finger, and the girl was completely shocked. She didn't expect this, and noted it, because if he lost the Imperial treasure, he would have problems. But it doesn't matter, because now she will always be there. Just like the ring she has on the girl from me belongs to him. The girl was in complete horror, and did not understand why he decided that he is as heartless to me as people think it is simply terrible to watch her little body shudder in agony. Now she understood what kind of poison it was. It was all a plan by Rexide Van Hessen, who was waiting for her to escape. It seems he is more cautious than she thought. The girl noted that she could have died from such a dose of poison, but the gentleman said not to worry. She definitely would not die from such a quantity. And if someone with her talents died so soon, it would be the greatest loss because she is a genius in the matter of deception. He said that he would repeat himself, that he needed to become emperor. No matter what the cost, the girl now realized that he had a completely different motive. Let him know that he has no talent to run an empire. But she doesn't understand why he wants to create problems for the Imperial family so much. Rexid told the Viper to follow him. He promises to give her everything she asks for. The girl tried to say something, but he said that it was not a proposal. He said she should understand that in this country, death row inmates have little choice. If she wants to live, she will do as he says. Instead of dying and letting her great brain go to waste, she should rather benefit both of them and work for him. The Duke also noted that it was very hot now, and if possible, he would like to bestow upon her the honorary title of special messenger. But he grabbed her, and she didn't expect it. He noted that given her skill in deception, she would simply run away if he allowed her to go on her own. And so, he will simply take her and carry her in his arms. Of course, he wouldn't carry her in his arms the whole way, so they moved on in a carriage. She can't be trusted. Everything she says is a lie. Every expression on this girl's face is a mask. He's not even sure that she's a real viper. As soon as the opportunity presents itself, he'll take her skin. Suddenly, he asked her name, and the girl was surprised. Not James, who went door to door selling fake jewelry. Not Elizabeth the Empire teacher. They didn't even know her name. Young merchant Johnny. The girl noted that it seemed like he was really interested in her, and he confirmed it. And the rest didn't know about her at all, so it looks like he'll have to uncover many more of her lies. The girl remarked that she was very interested. It seemed that he was not as ignorant as people said. Actually, the butler told him this, but he won't tell her about it. Still, Rexid wanted to know what her name was. The girl said that she had no name. He asked again, and she said that she didn't have a name because no one had given her one. The Duke believed that she simply had no parents. The girl replied that she didn't remember, but she didn't just fall out of the sky. Someone gave birth to her. He wondered if she had lived in a normal family. Perhaps she would not have thought about becoming a fraud. She was just lucky to live with the right people, and not for long. The reason why it is so difficult to catch her when I am is that she is not registered anywhere. She has no documents in any country. She will stay with him and help him as much as she can. So if he wants to give her a name, he can choose anyone. The Duke asked again if she would really help him, and the girl did not understand why she would go with him to his estate if she did not intend to be with him. The Duke replied that he had no idea. He didn't know what was going on in her little head. He doesn't understand how he knows that she isn't thinking of an escape plan right now. The Viper said that she had changed her mind before she knew only rumors and did not think openly that she could trust and serve him. The Duke wanted to know why she changed her mind. The girl replied that she would never have thought that he would think of everything and send food. She also noted that such unwavering determination is sometimes simply necessary. I became curious about what he poisoned her with, believing that it was chiffon or Peraltin. She knew it was a colorless, odorless poison, so she didn't even realize she had consumed it. But she knows that chiffon has a certain scent, which is why she decided that it was Peraltin. The symptoms did not match. The Duke asked why she was asking him. He didn't look like an idiot. She thought he would just tell her what he poisoned her with. Still, it's logical. He could tell her, but he doesn't really want to. Even if she is just a criminal who doesn't know her rights, he wants her to help him. But he can't just tell her without it putting a spell on her. The girl said with a smile that she was still asking to give her a name. She would agree to any. This young lady is very pretty. It was a waste of her wits to commit fraud, but without that talent, she would have had to deal with many of the problems herself. It would be difficult for a beautiful commoner to live a normal life here in the Empire. He'll probably have to think about a name, but he agrees. He noted that he had to admit that he had not expected the brilliant swindler to be so beautiful. The girl even became embarrassed. She noted that he had better stop trying to tear off her face. She noticed that her face was real, and she could assure him of it. The Duke realized that he was caught, and she said that she agreed with him. Caution is doubtful. All this is a very useful quality, the most important ones to survive in a big city. The Duke was confused, but suddenly he smelled a strange smell. He looked at her, and the girl smiled shyly. She used the sewers, where everyone relieved themselves to escape. The Duke noted that nothing could be done about it. He asked the coachman to stop the carriage. They entered a beautiful store. The girl was in shock. Right from the doorway, the Duke informed Madame that he was buying the entire store. He buys all the clothes, but the size must be suitable for this girl. The Viper immediately began to say that one set of clothes would be enough for her. But he didn't understand how one could live with one set of clothes. If they got dirty, she couldn't just wash them and wear them again. The girl said she thought he did the same, but the Duke was horrified. The Viper said that she did not understand how she could wear such expensive clothes. Of course she washed them if they got dirty and wore them again. The Duke did not agree with this and said that he did not understand what she was doing with all this stolen money. He asked, but what does she spend it on if not on clothes for herself? The girl replied that she had been providing shelter, and since the day she was abandoned in a dark alley, there were many sick people there, and the medicine was very expensive. She hasn't spent a penny yet. She's on luxury items. But the Duke said something like, as long as she belonged to him, she didn't have to worry about money. If there is something she needs, she can just tell him she is at that age that you want such things. The girl confirmed his words because everything was really so. But if she were in his place, she most likely would not even be able to make a final decision in such a situation. So without thinking, she suddenly asked if he was seriously going to buy her all this because such an offer seemed too generous to be true. The Duke just looked at her in surprise. Of course he would do it. And he didn't understand why she was asking such questions, since he had already decided everything himself. However, the girl did not calm down, and still doubting, asked whether she could really accept these things, because such a gift seemed impossible. Rexid confidently replied that she certainly could. Starting today, he would buy her anything she wanted. All she had to do was say so. So, don't be shy or doubt, but if it's so hard for her to choose, then let her choose at least one outfit to wear right now. The girl, having become a little bolder, began to walk around the store and stopped at one pink outfit, became interested in it, and asked the saleswoman about it. The Duke immediately turned to Madame, informing her that this outfit suited her, and therefore it should be properly prepared, since she was going to put it on now. Without wasting any time, the woman immediately began preparing quickly, tidying up the dress, and then handing it over to the girl. At the same time, she noted that the store has a separate room where the girl can calmly change clothes if she wishes. Viper hesitated. She didn't want to say it out loud, but she had never worn anything like this before, and that was where her uncertainty lay. So after a little hesitation, she carefully asked if Madame could help her with this, if she didn't mind, of course, since she couldn't handle it herself. The woman froze in obvious confusion and asked again if she had understood her correctly, but immediately felt the Duke's menacing gaze on her. He asked with displeasure if this was really such a difficult request, since she could undoubtedly help the girl put on a dress. Fearing the Duke's possible displeasure, Madame hastily assured him that she would of course help and pointed out where he could go. She was clearly nervous, choosing her words carefully, and looking as if she was afraid of saying something wrong and further irritating the Duke. He simply couldn't believe that Viper was just a young nameless girl from an orphanage, because her surprise seemed genuine. She is so amazed by this little gift, as if she had never received anything like it before, and was not accustomed to such care. He believed that taking care of her and showering her with attention was a great way to win her devotion, and so he spared no effort. However, as he watched what was happening, he couldn't help but wonder, did women really spend so much time just to put on one single dress? Duke Rexid was indifferent to women never getting close to any of them. However, he could not trust this one. Every word she said seemed a lie. Every action had a hidden meaning. There was no sincerity in her gaze, and her manners seemed carefully rehearsed. Suddenly, he felt a flash of anger. It was simply impossible to change clothes for so long. His patience ran out. He stepped forward, decisively pushed the doors, and without thinking entered the room ready to find out what was really going on. Inside, he saw a woman bound with ropes, but clutching a knife in her hand. She was clearly wary, as if expecting an attack. At that moment he realized, it was that damn trick again. Another trick, another lie. She had managed to fool him again, and it was unbearable. His voice was sharp, filled with irritation. He demanded an explanation, wanting to hear the truth, and not another convoluted lie. The woman answered without hesitation. The stranger had threatened her, and then simply disappeared. There was excitement in her voice, but Rexid was in no hurry to believe it. He barely suppressed a grin. Taking him for a fool? It was a waste of time. It was too obvious that this scene had been staged in advance. Still, he wanted to hear more. He waited for the woman to tell him exactly what words had been spoken the moment they had entered the room. She only smirked in response. If she had known there was a window here, she might have come herself. Her calmness was irritating. Then she turned to the stranger and asked directly what she was trying to achieve, what she needed from her this time. The next moment, she pulled out a knife, pointing it at her, not giving her a single chance to escape or resist. The girl bowed her head slightly and remarked mockingly, since they were alone, she had one important question. She was going to go to the outskirts of the city, where there were the fewest people, and now she needed to know where exactly to go. The woman replied that there was a shortcut through the shopping street, and that at the exit there was a small boutique that was easy to get out of. The girl listened carefully, and then told her to grip the knife tighter and raise her head, preparing for the next step. Everything went according to plan. Having quickly changed her clothes, she left the room without delay, saying at the end that she had to leave already. One awkward movement, and the consequences could be disastrous. So it is better for a woman not to try to make unnecessary movements. Smiling, she thanked her for her cooperation, noting that she had done an excellent job with the task. If Owen found out how it all ended, he would again think that the Duke was a pathetic man who allowed himself to be treated like that. He even remembered how he looked when he was angry. Viper had driven him to this state more than once, and it always looked the same. Tense facial features, clenched fists, and a look that showed rage. He picked up the knife, and it was immediately clear that she hadn't just grabbed the fork from prison. Somehow, Viper had managed to get her hands on this knife too, which only meant one thing. She was always prepared for any turn of events. He asked incredulously, had she really said that the shortest route was through Pacum? His voice was full of doubt, because this route seemed not just risky, but deadly. The woman confidently confirmed her words. Then he realized that he had no choice. He would have to use magic. It was hard to believe that she really went there, but there was no doubt. This was the most dangerous area of the city. The narrow streets were teeming with criminals, and every turn could hide a deadly trap. Even the most desperate tried to avoid this place, but apparently not her. He couldn't delay. Every second he lost increased the distance between them. If he delayed, she would go even further, which meant he had to act now. He quickly left the shop, focusing on his magic. Activating it again, he tried to locate her. She was moving, and he had to catch up to her before it was too late. Meanwhile, Viper had already managed to go quite far. Her legs carried her forward, and her thoughts were focused on the fact that she must not stop. While he was looking for her, she had a chance to slip away. She relied on his naivety, because he had fallen for it again. It was far from the first time she had lied to him, or acted helpless. Who would have thought that it would be so easy to deceive him? She was sure that someone like him would never become an emperor. Although he tried, his mistakes spoke for themselves. A leader must be insightful, and he allowed himself to be led by tricks, even the most obvious ones. No matter how hard he tried, he would fail. He lacked the toughness, the intelligence that a ruler needed, and time after time, he only confirmed this by allowing himself to be deceived. She knew that if she passed out here in a place like this, it would be the end of her. There were no good Samaritans in this area. Here she would either be killed or sold, and both options were unacceptable to her. But suddenly she bumped into someone. The blow was unexpected sharp. For a moment her vision blurred, but soon the figure of a stranger appeared before her, and something about him immediately seemed dangerous to her. At first, she couldn't see him clearly, but when her eyes adjusted to the darkness, an unfamiliar man appeared before her. His face was foreign to her, but his gaze betrayed a man accustomed to power. He came closer, never taking his eyes off her, and mockingly asked what such a noble lady was doing in such an inappropriate place. There was a mixture of curiosity and obvious threat in his voice. Viper instantly realized that the situation was becoming dangerous. If she had known that she would face such a turn of events, she would have chosen clothes that would allow her to move faster. Right now, her outfit was getting in the way. The man reached out to her clearly, intending to grab her, but she reacted in time. Her body responded instantly, and she managed to jump to the side, getting away from his hands. She grinned and promised to show him something unusual, her little trick. There was confidence in her voice, but inside she felt a slight tension. However, when she tried to demonstrate what she had planned, her body suddenly weakened, and she collapsed onto the cold floor, unable to maintain her balance. This feeling was already familiar to her. She had experienced exactly the same in the forest. It could not be ordinary poison. Its effect seemed too strange and unpredictable. Most likely it was magic, but its nature remained unclear. Perhaps it acted precisely at the moment of application of force, because the girl did not feel pain, and her body seemed to no longer belong to her. The man watching her came closer, his eyes flashing with joy. He had clearly expected this outcome, but it didn't come as a surprise to her. He didn't bother to explain what was happening to her, so she had to figure it out on her own. It made her angry, but she wasn't going to show weakness. The man laughed, looking down at her. He sarcastically noted that it seemed she had overestimated her strength and was now paying for her self-confidence. He added with undisguised sarcasm that her outfit was indeed very nice. His words sounded mocking, and there was a clear hint of malice in them. Then, shaking his head with a smile, he remarked that she must be mad to decide to crawl on the ground in broad daylight like a miserable beggar. He mockingly asked where she was so eager to go, and mockingly suggested that she hurry up since such a beautiful lady clearly shouldn't linger in such a position. The girl watched him in horror, not believing that he was saying all this seriously. His behavior seemed completely inadequate to her, as if he had lost touch with reality. The man slowly approached her, his smile not fading. A dangerous glint flashed in his gaze, which sent an unpleasant chill down her spine. He spoke again, wondering what she had pumped herself up with to look in such a pitiful state. There was undisguised curiosity in his voice. He then suggested that people like her were unlikely to buy the cheap junk sold on the streets, since they always had access to something much more valuable. He said with confidence that she must have something better hidden away, and hoped that she had saved some for him. There was a hint of blatant innuendo in his voice, but suddenly he froze, raised his head, and the next moment his face was distorted with surprise. He clearly saw something that made him tense up. The viper also raised its head, and barely had time to notice how the man flew to the side as if he had been struck by an unknown force. everything happened too quickly. Blood flashed in the air. He was dead. His body collapsed to the ground, and scarlet drops scattered across the floor, painting it a dark color. The girl turned her head to the side and saw a huge man. He looked at her with a gloomy expression and coldly asked if she wanted to die. He stepped closer, hovering over her, and then with a slight grin, asked why she was sprawled out there, as if this was the most comfortable place to rest. It took Viper almost 20 minutes to get to this street from the boutique. She thought she had gone far enough, but the Duke was faster. He had already caught up with her. She desperately tried to crawl further away, hoping to increase the distance between them. However, her strength was waning, and her legs wouldn't obey her. At this time, the Duke, without hesitation, approached her. Pursuer grabbed him by the face and squeezed him so hard that he did not even have time to react. Viper looked at this picture in amazement. How could he lift this brute so easily with one hand? There was not even a hint of tension in his movements. The girl rose to her feet and, without losing her composure, asked the Crown Prince to wait a little. It was important for her to do this before the Duke did something radical. She knew in advance that everything would end exactly like this and tried to stop him beforehand. But now it was useless. The situation had already gotten out of her control. The Duke reminded her again of what he had already said. The ring would not go anywhere, and now she had no doubt that it was simply impossible to get rid of it. The Viper realized that as long as this ring was on her finger, she would not be able to hide. Running was useless because her every move was under control. She admitted that she thought so. She took the ring with her, only in case of need, but as it turned out, it did not help to avoid problems. The girl asked if the Duke was using a spell, and he calmly confirmed it, seeing no point in hiding the obvious. Now everything was completely clear. She couldn't run away, and even asking was useless. The Duke knew perfectly well that she understood this. Realizing that resistance was pointless, she simply expressed gratitude for his quick response. Otherwise, her dress would definitely have been ruined. The Duke looked at her with obvious suspicion. He was sure that she was going to run away again, and he had no doubt in his guess. Viper tried to dissuade him. This time, she didn't even hope that she would succeed in escaping. The realization of magical control killed the last hopes for freedom. Now that she knew the spell was working, she wasn't going to do anything stupid again. The only question was what would happen next. The girl looked at the Duke carefully and asked why he was looking at her so strangely. There was something incomprehensible in his gaze. In response, without further ado, he picked her up in his arms and headed in the other direction, leaving her no choice. Viper sighed and tried to explain that she could go on her own. There was a conciliatory tone in her voice. She didn't want to argue. She began to apologize for running away, but the Duke cut her off. He made it clear that her feet would not touch the ground until she reached the estate. Moreover, he advised her not to even try to break free if she did not want to make her situation worse. Well, she had no choice. She wasn't going to end up like that poor guy, so she'd stay here for now as valuable cargo. Here comes her second kidnapping, only this time she didn't even have to resist. It all happened too quickly. The Duke carried her right to the gates of the estate, never letting her go. She had no doubt that he would do just that. The butler, seeing such a picture, was clearly surprised. He did not expect to see the Duke calmly carrying her on his shoulder, as if it was the order of things. The butler looked at the Duke carefully and asked with slight bewilderment what he had in his hands and why the gentleman had returned at such a late hour. It was clear from his tone that he had not expected such an appearance. Rexid sighed tiredly and said with displeasure that this girl was running around the city like a madwoman, not giving him a single chance to catch her. Hunting her turned out to be more difficult than he expected. Hanging upside down, the girl finally decided to speak up and asked to be put down. The blood rushed to her head, causing everything around her to throb and hurt unpleasantly. The Duke did not continue to mock her and carefully lowered her to the floor. Her legs could barely support her weight, and dark spots flashed before her eyes. Her head was spinning from the sudden change in position. Owen straightened up abruptly, greeting her in a solemn voice. He quietly announced that she was now a guest at the Grand Duke of Hessen's estate, and she would do well to remember that. With a slight grin, he called her nothing less than a genius of deception, and then added that she was now known here as Mrs. Viper. His tone was at once respectful and mocking. Rexid got straight to the point without delay. He said that they needed to sign a contract, the terms of which had already been worked out and were not subject to discussion. As it turned out, the contract had been prepared in advance, and Owen immediately presented it, confirming that everything had already been settled, and all that remained was to sign. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise, clearly not expecting such speed, and Owen introduced himself with a polite smile, explaining that he was His Highness's butler and was in charge of all matters in the estate. He added that she should simply address him as Owen, without unnecessary formalities, since they would now be crossing paths often. The girl looked at him with distrust, and squinting, asked, "Wasn't he the one who cast the spell on her?" There was irritation in her voice. Owen looked a little embarrassed, but he didn't deny it. He nodded, confirming her guess, and even expressed regret that he had to use force in this situation. He admitted that he had considerable experience, but even he could not always predict all of her cunning moves and well-thought-out traps. The girl just chuckled. She had long known. The main thing in a perfect scam is to hide emotions and not lose vigilance. It was clear from Owen's eyes and manners that he was not an ordinary butler. It was not the Grand Duke's idea to use the spell on her, but his. The girl, realizing the difficulty of the situation, carefully asked if there was a way to get rid of the magic. Even if she was extremely polite, would he tell her how to remove the spell? The butler looked at her with a slight grin, and asked again, clarifying that even if such a method existed, he would be the first to know about it. She should understand that magic of this level leaves no loopholes. It was an ancient spell that worked with a special potion. It was invented long ago to prevent slaves from escaping from their masters. This magic leaves no room for freedom. There is no way to actually undo it. The only exception is the death of the slave or his owner. Only then is the magical bond broken. The butler hastened to explain this before the girl could come to the obvious conclusion. If I remember that the Duke's death will break the spell, then I just need to kill the Duke. The magic works by having the master's blood flow through the slave's veins. If the master dies, this blood dries up instantly. The spell is broken, but the consequences are inevitable. He hoped she didn't need to explain what would happen next. The master's death meant her own death. By killing the Duke, she would send herself to the grave with him. When the Duke himself learned of this property of magic, he was completely horrified. Without thinking, he grabbed the butler, unable to hide his shock. He screamed at him, demanding an explanation. Why hadn't he told him about it right away? Why had this important detail of the spell been hidden? The Duke was furious. The girl watched silently as it happened. Gradually, a clear picture emerged in her head. Now she understood what this man was like. Besides his lack of intelligence, the Duke had a weak spot. She saw how easily he lost his temper when he was put in an awkward position. He holds the fate of those condemned to death in his hands. Whatever he orders her to do, she has no choice. However, she is surprised by how emotionally he reacts. This man destroys everything in his path. If something moves, he kills it. If it doesn't move, he first makes it move and then kills it anyway. The butler remarked that he would not have used the spell if the Duke had known about its side effects. Apparently, the information was withheld on purpose. Otherwise, Miss Viper would have remained free, and His Highness's carefully planned plan would have collapsed before it even began. The girl just chuckled to herself. Why were there so many madmen around him? Didn't he notice it himself? The butler just smiled and shrugged. It's simple. He always wanted prosperity and stability for this land. That's why tough measures are being taken. He then asked if Miss Viper knew that Count Shugi, whom she had once deceived, had committed suicide when his luck had turned against him. Barons Fallow and Shutton, believing her invested in failed deals, having lost everything they were forced to sell their titles in order to somehow survive. The girl smiled slightly when she heard this. No, she didn't know such details, but the information amused her. The butler merely shrugged and said indifferently that this was not surprising. All these people, one way or another, deserved their fate. Count Shugi didn't just run a business, he controlled an entire network of illegal human trafficking operations. His slave market was the largest and most influential in the region. And the two barons, with whom he collaborated, were co-owners of a huge casino that brought in fabulous profits. However, the Duke had no doubt that Miss Viper knew about their dark deeds, even without him. All of the victims of Miss Viper's robberies used their wealth to evade the law and escape justice. None of them were clear before the court or before their own conscience. The Duke noted with a cold smile that since these people were no longer alive, there were no problems with them. However, this did not mean that all the crimes of Miss Viper herself could be so easily forgotten. And the girl herself did not commit these daring robberies for someone else's benefit. Her goal was never to atone for evil or protect someone. Of course not. She simply chose goals that she would not regret later. It was easier for her to live this way without burdening herself with an extra burden of guilt. In a perfect world where evil people didn't exist, no one would need to steal, kill, or hide. Everyone could just live in peace. But the reality is harsh. Miss Viper was declared wanted 4 years ago, and for her many crimes, she was sentenced to death. Her name has become a symbol of horror for some and admiration for others. Luckily for her, His Highness Rexed Van Hessen decided to give her a chance. He offered her the chance to forget the past and start a new life as a law-abiding citizen. From now on, the Grand Duke himself and all his servants will perceive her not as a criminal, but as a business partner. In this cooperation, everyone will have their own benefit. Once she signs the contract, her fate will change. She will pledge to help His Highness take the throne, no matter what methods she has to use to achieve this. And of course, she will sign it. At that moment, she feels like the chief of staff at the Blue House, making an important political decision. The Blue House is the official residence of the South Korean president. Who would have thought that the day would come when she would sign such a dishonest agreement? The butler asked incredulously if she was sure she didn't want to reread the contract before signing it. It might save her from unwanted surprises in the future. After all, according to the terms, it is no longer possible to change its content, although if necessary, it is possible to add clauses concerning her personal requirements. For example, salaries, an annual renewable contract in which the amount of payment is not yet specified, but with a set limit of 1 billion norths. Moreover, any additional expenses that arose during the work process would be covered without any questions asked. In fact, there was nothing more to discuss. The butler was stunned. He didn't even understand at what point she had managed to familiarize herself with the entire contents of the document. He thought she would simply sign it without looking. The Duke narrowed his eyes in displeasure and irritably ordered her to stop lingering. He was impatient to complete this formal process as quickly as possible. The girl decided that she needed to add something important to the contract. She did not rush to make a decision because she understood that it could radically change the entire agreement between them. The Duke asked her kindly what she wanted to change. She replied that if she ever proved her usefulness and his need for her services ceased, he should break the contract. She had a spell placed on her that made her feel in control. She couldn't understand what was happening if he continued to treat her like a slave, even after becoming emperor. The gentleman asked again if she really thought he was so dishonest. The girl looked up, explaining that they had met less than a day ago, and it was difficult for her to trust him so quickly. She wanted to be released from the contract once the terms were met and the contract was terminated. This was an important condition for her to move on. Despite her doubts and fears, she still signed the contract. It was her decision, despite all the risks that she was well aware of. Once the contract is terminated, Rexide Van Hessen will no longer use spells to fulfill the terms. Both parties guarantee the fulfillment of the agreement by signing it for life. The contract created from Eisenbach's purest mana guaranteed the fulfillment of the terms with its power, and if someone violated it, it would cost their life. It was a powerful tool for fulfilling obligations. She believed that the Duke had such a contract, and her intuition was correct. He paused, not immediately responding to her remark, as if considering whether to reveal everything at once. The Duke smiled and noted that he had not expected her to know about such a contract. His surprise was brief, but it did not go unnoticed in the girl's eyes. He agreed to her proposal, but the butler was clearly shocked. He did not expect that the Duke could so easily agree to the conditions, which were quite harsh. The Duke instructed the butler not to create unnecessary disorder. He had no intention of causing a scene, especially when he had already taken someone's life without warning anyone. Viper felt that Rexide Van Hessen had indeed given in. She was confident in her intuition and was glad that her senses had not deceived her. She asked him, smiling happily, if he agreed to the terms. The master confirmed and said that he had not cast the spell to treat her like a slave. It was the least he could do. However, he hoped that everything would be done well. He did not want to be disappointed in her professionalism and expected that she would justify his trust. The girl confidently declared that she was a real specialist, to which the Duke told her to simply follow him, confident that she would cope with the task. When they entered the Treasury, her eyes widened in amazement. There was so much stuff there that she couldn't immediately comprehend how valuable the place was. She was amazed. The girl could not believe that she was seeing all this. She had never encountered such riches before, and she did not expect to see this. The Duke, noticing her surprise, asked if she wanted anything from what she saw. He also noted that the Treasury was enchanted, and this was an important aspect of its security. If she tries to activate this mechanism, she will be in danger, and she should think twice before doing anything. The risk is too great, and the consequences could be fatal. It all depends on her decision. If she decides to steal something, it will lead to sad consequences. It is better to just go next to him, take what you need, and not hide anything if she likes it. The girl was delighted, but the Duke, observing her joy, noted reservedly that these things did not matter to him. He was not fixated on material things. He did not care. She felt an incredible relief, like a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders, and her emotions were so vivid that she could not hide her joy that everything had worked out. When the gentleman turned around, he couldn't understand how she had managed to put all those rings on herself so quickly. It was strange, and even surprising to some extent. He was completely shocked to see that there were already so many jewels around her. She had somehow managed to collect them, and he couldn't believe his eyes. The Duke wondered at what point she had managed to take all this. They were moving so close to each other that he did not notice how she had grabbed the jewels. The girl, with a slight smile, replied that it was better for him not to know, because it would be for his own good if he knew nothing about how she did it. As they approached the center of the hall, he stopped, but she did not stop and continued moving forward, not doubting her decision. The girl said that someday he might need her services, and she wants to understand if he is sure that he is ready to spend all this on her because her help is expensive. The gentleman calmly replied that it didn't matter to him. He considered it useless. She was a little surprised by his words, but at the same time she realized that Rexide really didn't care. He was a man who had everything and needed nothing. And for him, power and material values were not something significant. He simply did not need it. Why then did he decide to become emperor? The question remained unanswered, and she could not understand what motivated him. Suddenly he called her to him. They walked up to the counter, and he placed the contract there. This was the moment when things got serious, and she knew the choice had been made. He told her that to proceed further, they needed to activate the contract. This was a prerequisite for continuing their journey. Rexide took out a dagger and said that the notch in the contract had to be filled with the blood of both parties. This was a mandatory condition, and she had to agree. The girl felt fear because she had to take an important step. She did not know what to expect, but she had to face this challenge. She asked again if he really hadn't changed his mind, because she hadn't expected that to be the case. She hadn't been prepared for such a turn of events. The Duke said that wasn't the case. A deep cut would have to be made to fill the hole. He hoped she wasn't afraid of that prospect. He added that he hoped she wouldn't be embarrassed by the scar on her hand. Because it was inevitable, he did everything to ensure that the agreement was fulfilled. The girl was completely horrified. It was completely unexpected, and she turned to him with a question, reminding him that he had said that he wanted to become an emperor. Viper believed that Rexid truly deserved his position because he fought on the battlefield, killing not only soldiers, but also knights, leaving blood and death in his wake. But if the Duke is so soft and indecisive, it could become a serious problem for everyone. Softness in his case is a threat that could play a cruel joke in the future. She might have to act more harshly if the situation called for it. She might kill girls, children, and maybe even old people if that was necessary for the purpose. She asked him again if he would hesitate if the time came when such decisions had to be made. After all, her tests would not be gentle, and it was important to know his answer. She decided to pick up the knife, intending to cut herself. But Rexide quickly grabbed it and confidently said that this was a completely different matter. There was no need to go down this path. He was sure that he would not be afraid and would not retreat. But the process itself was difficult for him. It was difficult for him to look at his own blood. It disgusted him. However, if you think about it, they don't have to shed the same amount of blood. All that was required was to prove their readiness and decide how important this moment was. Viper was in complete shock as she watched Rexide cut his own skin without the slightest hesitation. He didn't hesitate, didn't think twice, just did it like it was a normal thing. Rexide asked for her hand, and she, without thinking, came closer to him, ready to fulfill his request despite everything that was happening. They moved in this direction without turning back. He carefully cut her finger, and she felt a drop of blood roll down, symbolizing the conclusion of their contract. It was the beginning of a new path for both of them. The contract was concluded in such a simple, even primitive way, but that was its strength. It was honest and direct, without unnecessary words and ceremonies. Viper thought wryly that this way of concluding such an important contract seemed a little primitive, but perhaps that was part of its strength. Simplicity. The Duke, looking around at everything that was happening, noted that since she had agreed, it meant that she believed in his intentions and did not consider him capable of making her his slave. Dvoretsky, for his part, added that trust is an important thing, but you can't trust everyone. Even the sky has its dark sides, and no one should trust so easily. Viper noticed that his butler was really smart, and without him, Rexide would definitely not have managed. He was a man who always knew what to do in difficult situations. Rexide suggested that they focus on building trust between them. Now that the contract was binding them, he would trust her, but she couldn't think that he could be fooled. The Viper noticed that the Duke was probably afraid to hear from her that she was going to deceive him. This made him wary, and she decided to clarify the situation without giving reasons for misunderstanding. In response to his concern, she became a little angry, but tried to calm him down. She said that she understood his doubts perfectly well, and now everything depended on whether he decided to believe her words. The Duke expressed a desire to believe her, but he still could not shake the feeling that she was hiding something. He wondered if there was something else she was not telling him directly. He offered her a chance to open up and lay it all out there, and promised he wouldn't judge her if she decided to reveal her secrets. But there was still tension in the air. However, his displeasure only increased when he realized that she was simply ignoring him. This made him even more angry, and he felt his patience running out. The Viper, despite the tension of the situation, began to laugh. Suddenly, she peeled off her skin, as if freeing herself from something unnecessary, and revealed who she really was. Under the mask was a completely different face. It was a girl with short pink hair. She stood up confident in her choice. This was her way of getting rid of everything unnecessary. She added that she looks much cuter this way, and she likes this new look, but in reality she always tried to make the mask more perfect than her real face. The girl explained that the color of her hair and eyes was just a mask, an attempt to hide her real face, which she always tried to make more confusing and secretive so that people could not expose her. The Duke looked at her with horror and asked if it was really her. She, with a slight expression on her face, asked him again if he really wanted to make sure. He started screaming in panic that she was crazy. He just wanted her to tell him the truth, not to show him anything else. He was ready to accept her words as long as she didn't hide anything. After that, the Duke turned and walked away. The Viper, a little disappointed, asked him not to be angry. Her request was gentle, but there was still a hint of resentment in it. She remembered that the last time she showed her face to anyone without a mask was when she was a 6-year-old girl. This memory was painful and scary for her, but also important. The Duke was shocked to realize how she had to live with such a condition from such a young age. It changed his view of her, and he began to feel more sympathy for her. Viper explained that her face changed with age, and for her safety, she was forced to hide it to protect herself from possible threats and unpleasant situations. The Duke, still confused, remarked that she could probably just change her face to begin her manipulations again. He continued to think that her real face might be completely different. She, smiling slightly, noted that she had almost forgotten another important point that she had to reveal. The Duke felt that not everything was clear yet. Viper took off her lenses and apologized. She admitted that she had gotten so used to them that she had completely forgotten that they were just part of her mask. They were another layer of her multi-layered personality. The Duke, curious and cautious, approached her and began to carefully feel her face. He was sure that she was no longer hiding anything that could cast doubt on her words. He hoped that now, after this, she would not hide anything important from him. His gaze was full of hope, but also wariness, as if he was prepared for any turn of events. The Viper, smiling weakly, declared that she was not hiding anything from him anymore. It hurt her when he pulled her cheeks, but she could not help but let him do it, although she suffered from it. Lying on her bed, Viper looked thoughtfully at the rings she had been given. It was a strange pleasure to look at such simple things as rings when the silence around her was tense. The Duke asked her if she really loved the rings so much. He still didn't understand why she was so attached to them, since they were simple ornaments and not something meaningful to her. The Viper replied that she didn't particularly like the rings, and she didn't understand why she had allowed him to kidnap her earlier, not realizing that her life had been full of bad decisions and compromises. The Duke, a little embarrassed, pointed out that if she wanted something, he would always be ready to take her wherever she wanted. He offered her that whatever she wanted, he would always be there. After this, she asked what she was to do next, and the Duke replied that they would discuss the matter after they had eaten. He was in no hurry, considering that now was the time to eat. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. The Duke nodded and said to come in. He was already prepared for the visit, not expecting that his guests would surprise everyone. When the door opened, the girl was stunned. She did not expect to meet them in this house, and her eyes instantly filled with curiosity and surprise. The woman was completely shocked when she saw the girl, but quickly pulled herself together. The girl, without wasting time, first greeted them with a kind smile to ease the tension. The maid couldn't believe her eyes. She could hardly contain her surprise, because the young master who had been alone for so long had finally found himself a girl. She approached the gentleman and said that he had lived alone for so long, and now he had found such a beautiful bride, that this was real happiness for everyone. However, the Duke apparently did not understand what the maid was talking about. He was surprised that the butler did not tell her that they were going to get married, because this point should have been obvious. The Duke still insisted that he and the girl were going to get married, despite the misunderstandings. Marco, one of the new acquaintances, introduced himself as the one in charge of the kitchen and greeted her with a smile. The girl, smiling, said that she was very pleased to meet him, but she was a little embarrassed because she did not know how to introduce herself correctly, since she did not yet have a last name. The Duke, smiling, decided to help her with this, and said that her name was Rosika. The girl was surprised, not expecting to be called that, but tried not to show her feelings. She quickly came to her senses, and smiling slightly confirmed that her name was indeed Rosika. Her voice was confident, although inside she felt a little confused. She also admitted that to her great embarrassment, she had no last name, and so it was better to call her simply Rosika. There was nothing special about it, but it embarrassed her. Everyone in the room immediately wondered if there was any special meaning or history to the name. This added interest to the conversation, and everyone eagerly awaited the answer. The servants noted that it was a great honor for them to meet the girl, because it was a rare event that did not happen every day in their house. They all felt the importance of the moment. Masha, who was nearby, greeted her without any ceremony. She thought she should introduce herself. "My name is Masha," she said with a smile, not hiding her friendliness. Masha believed that the most beautiful girl was Princess Eisenbach. However, today, looking at Rosika, she realized that someone could surpass her. The beauty of this girl amazed everyone. The Duke remembered how Masha had been his nanny when he still lived in the Imperial Palace. 10 years had passed since then. He had been only 15 then, and now he had returned here together with the bearded cook and her son. The cook had been the head chef at the palace, but 3 years ago he had decided to move here. Masha wondered all the time why she continued to call him young master, despite the years that had passed since then. Masha noticed that the Duke was not interested in women at all. This surprised her, because she did not expect him to invite a lady to visit after everything she knew about him before. The cook, with a smile on his face, said that the Duke had never dated girls. He even began to think that he had problems in this area and did not know how to deal with it. The Duke got angry and rudely replied that the cook had better shut up. Rosika, watching this scene, understood that the problem was not that he was not interested in women, but in his unwillingness to open up. The Duke, with horror in his eyes, asked what she was thinking. Masha reassured him, noting that there was nothing special about it, and she understood everything perfectly well. The cook couldn't help but laugh and said that he still hoped the food was to his taste. His face expressed genuine concern, and he was looking for confirmation. Rosika replied that the food was indeed very tasty. However, she added that it was difficult for her to understand where the taste came from, since she was simply cooking eggs. She also asked if she could try the dish that the Highness ate. The Duke replied with a smile that, of course, it was a lamb chop. Mr. Raven was a great fan of these chops. He and rags-eyed young gentlemen and peers had similar tastes, so they often ate together. Rosika thought about it when she heard the name. She wondered how their lives were connected, if he had grown up with Rexide in the Imperial Palace and they were the same age. If Rexide and the Duke were peers and grew up together, then Rexide would be the first candidate to be removed from the throne. This was not a very encouraging thought. To take the throne of the empire, one had to become the crown prince, which meant a power struggle. Rosika couldn't understand why this process was so complicated. She was at a loss when she noticed that Masha suddenly started crying. The girl could not understand what had happened and why it had affected her so much. The Duke turned to Marco, instructing him to calm Masha down. He instructed him to take her out and return when everything was finished, leaving Rosika perplexed. Rosika remained where she was, lost in thought. She noticed that Marco and Masha clearly knew that the Duke had something important and perhaps even revolutionary in mind. The Duke, looking at her carefully, said that her tears were not caused by what she thought. She was not crying because of what had happened, but he wanted to finish the meal first. When the meal was finished, he promised to explain to her exactly what her job entailed. It was not what she expected, but her curiosity was so great that she was willing to listen. The previous emperor and empress had 4 children. The first was Robert van Hexen, now emperor, and the second was Reed van Hexen, Grand Duke. They both held important positions. The third daughter, Rachel Prania, was Duchess of Prania, enjoying a quiet life away from political intrigue. The fourth was Rexed van Hessen, a Grand Duke whose role had yet to be determined. Robert, the eldest son, took the throne with ease. This was expected since he was the heir. He faced no obstacles to his crown, and the empire accepted him without question. Raid, the second son, remained loyal to the emperor and actively helped strengthen the empire. He also worked to expand its territory, but did not seek the throne as he had his own role to play. Rachel, third in line, preferred to live quietly, without interfering in the affairs of state. Her life as a duchess was quiet and measured, and she did not try to change her position. Rexed was younger than his brothers and sister, but for some reason he decided to disturb the peace. His ambitions were unusually strong, and he began to strive for power, which surprised many, including his family. Rexed dreamed of becoming emperor, and to do so, he had to defeat two other contenders, the Crown Prince and the Grand Duke of Ride. It was a difficult task, but he was determined. However, the situation was not hopeless. The Grand Duke of Ride could be persuaded to give up his claims if he was offered something in return. But to do so, one would have to be a skilled manipulator. Ideally, Rexide hoped to avoid bloodshed and wanted Ride to voluntarily give up his ambitions. He thought this would be the cleanest and most efficient path to power. The Duke, however, was certain that the task would not be easy even for her. He noted that Rexide was too ambitious to simply back down and that it would take more to achieve his goal. The thing was, Rexide didn't just want to take the throne. He wanted to get rid of the emperor and his family. His ambitions went far beyond the usual struggle for power. However, the biggest problem was the Crown Prince, who was not willing to simply give up his position. The prince was supported by the people, and if Rexide decided to act, he would have to decide what to do with him. The girl immediately realized that in this case, it was necessary to take certain precautions. For example, she could somehow seriously damage him, but fortunately, there was no need for this. She entered the room and immediately felt how cold it was. There was an unusual coolness in the air that was immediately felt on her skin. The temperature in the room was maintained by magic stones, which artificially lowered the heat, creating a coolness that was unpleasant for the body. The air also carried the distinctive smell of parsia, a substance used to prevent animal carcasses from rotting. This was typical for such places. She turned to the Duke, asking if she had understood his words correctly. He had just said that he did not consider it necessary to kill the Crown Prince. She wondered if that was really so. The Duke pulled the blanket off the bed, revealing the Crown Prince, who he explained was already dead. This explained that no further action was required. He confirmed that this was because the Crown Prince was indeed dead. He explained that the question of his murder was no longer relevant since he was no longer alive. They were both about the same age, and ever since he had come to the palace, their lives had been intertwined. Up until that point, they had relied on each other and shared a lot. He was a spoiled, soft child who saw him as his best friend, unaware that the Duke was hiding his true intentions and claws. The Crown Prince often came to Draxx to meet him. These trips became habitual for him, and each time he was in search of new impressions. And this time the situation was no exception. He came deciding that this was finally the chance he had been waiting for so long. It was an important event for him. The girl understood what he meant, but she became curious as to why he was lying. What was the Duke hiding that he decided to say exactly that way? When she looked at him closely, she noticed that they really did look alike. The prince was interested in her impressions and asked what she thought about this similarity. Rosica had spent her entire life as a criminal, accustomed to cruelty, and not considering it anything special. She was ready to reduce the emperor's killer to nothing and not feel the slightest regret or guilt. The Duke was sure that the girl was afraid of him, that her fears made her obey. He saw something similar in her eyes, but he lacked the confidence to understand her true feelings. However, the girl insisted that this was not so. She did not feel fear of him, But the Duke confidently stated that it seemed that now she finally realized that he could be trusted, or at least feared. When a crazy killer kidnapped her, with a knife to her friend's throat, Rosika found herself in a hopeless situation. But her friend was innocent, and it was his life that hung in the balance, and she could do nothing. She tried to object, asking for a chance to explain herself. However, the Duke only politely apologized and said that she would not be able to escape, that she needed to understand and accept this cruel reality. Rosika was still trying to say something, but despite her efforts, no one was listening to her words. She felt almost helpless, realizing that the time for talking had long passed. She turned to the Duke, asking him if he really wanted her to be afraid of him. Wasn't he worried that she would simply not believe him and would perceive his words as empty threats? Or maybe his concern was that she didn't trust him in the first place, and he was afraid in advance that her attitude towards him wouldn't change, that she would keep her distance. Come to think of it, she had seen the Duke deceive others more than once. His sly looks and false words were familiar to her. She could tell exactly when he was telling the truth and when he was just hiding his intentions. Rosika became a fraud, not because her life was too hard, but because it was easier and more profitable for her to use her talents for deception and manipulation than to work honestly. Since birth, she had hidden abilities that helped her perfectly sense people. She could instantly calculate their psychotype and understand what kind of person was hidden behind their appearance. Rosika had long ago realized what the Duke was like, and if she was wrong, it was only in one thing. She thought he was eager to become emperor, but as it turned out, his ambitions were quite different, and she was wrong in her assessment. The Duke sighed heavily and asked again if she could repeat what she had just said. He was clearly not sure he had understood her words correctly and needed clarification. The girl noticed that perhaps her words were not precise enough. He did not want to become an emperor, as she had initially thought. In fact, his goal was revenge, and that was more important to him. The Duke laughed at her words and noted that it was quite an interesting guess. He couldn't help but ask who she thought he might want to avenge. After all, it was already becoming curious. She replied that he probably wanted revenge on the crown prince. The Duke thought about it and asked why she had decided that he could not understand what could have led to such a thought. He explained that if his goal was the throne, it would be logical to kill the crown prince since he was the main rival. So his interest in revenge seemed strange to her, as if he wanted something else. The girl couldn't understand why he was continuing this pointless conversation, as if trying to confuse her. Her patience was wearing thin, and she was surprised to note that his logic was irritating her more and more. The girl answered reservedly that it could be compared to a situation when a buyer checks a product before paying for it. She was sure that when dealing with people, it was important to be careful and evaluate them carefully. The Duke tried to justify himself by saying that he hadn't meant anything like that, but the girl didn't let him finish explaining that when she meets a person, she immediately evaluates him to see how trustworthy he is. And it is important not to forget that each person is influenced by some desire. At some point it becomes stronger than reason. Even the most rational person can succumb to this temptation. If a person has a desire to win and to be well processed, then the mind may be weaker than this desire. This is a rather dangerous situation because a person may act contrary to his common sense. And the lowest level is when a person is so weak that he is unable to resist his desires. He easily succumbs to temptation, even if it clearly leads him to error or a fall. Despite the fact that the main character is used to deceiving everyone without exception, there is one limit that she never crosses. This is her personal border, and she is not ready to joke with it. This point remains immutable for her. When the Duke asked what she was talking about, she explained that those who trust people despite their cruelty and treachery become easy prey, even for those who are not professional swindlers. That was her point. To put it simply, she does not deceive simpletons. She will choose those who believe in good intentions only if that person has long sold his conscience, betraying his own principles and morals. The situation has developed in such a way that even she is beginning to feel a sense of guilt that she has never experienced before. This feeling seems strange and frightening to her, especially considering her attitude towards people, even high-ranking ones. Rexid's personality type is incredibly kind. He is always ready to show compassion, no matter the circumstances. The Duke, hearing her words, asked again if she was evaluating him, having only known him for a few days. She replied that this time was quite enough for her. Everything became clear when she looked at his actions, especially the way he treated her, a criminal sentenced to death. This was her answer. Rexid is truly a man who will be infinitely kind to his own, but is capable of acting without hesitation when it comes to protecting his trusted ones. He is ready to take decisive action if it is important for those dear to him. In addition, he believes that he can always count on those around him. Although he is aware that he easily trusts people, he continues to do so, relying on his intuition and desire to believe in the good. The Duke tries to establish a trusting relationship with the girl, thinking that this way he will be able to win her over. He advises her to hire his butler to help, but she does not believe him at all. On top of that, he is sure that by showing her his despotic character, he will be able to gain her respect. If the Duke was capable of killing innocent people, except for the prince, he would have risen long ago and brought her the heads of Mesha and Marco. She is convinced that it is impossible to leave traces, and she believes that the Duke would not be capable of such a thing. She believes that he will not take the lives of those who are innocent. These thoughts are sure in her heart. In her opinion, he should not show his strength because it does not suit him. He is surprised that she trusts him and does not believe the rumors about his murder of the crown prince, considering it a lie. The girl noticed that despite his claim that he aimed to become an emperor, she saw no clear reason for it. He had never said what he would do after he achieved his goal. But now she seemed to understand. The Duke has no pity, no greed, no clear purpose in life. But after the death of a person close to him who was killed by the crown prince, he had only one goal: revenge. His purpose became clear. A month she remembers well. She knows that he was the one who killed that man. But those around him know nothing about it, which gives him additional power. It was the death of the first in line to the throne of the empire, the crown prince, and his death was a momentous event that led to a great change in the Duke's life, setting him on the path of revenge. So far, no one except the one who killed Crown Prince Raven and the other people in this huge castle knew of his death. The entire court and servants remained completely unaware of what had happened. However, somehow Raven's body ended up in Rexside's possession. This added to the mystery of the situation, as no one had seen it since the prince's death. Questions about how it came to be in the Duke's possession remained unanswered. In such a situation, all suspicions will most likely be directed at you. This will help clear Rexid of the false accusations of the Crown Prince's murder and direct attention to the true culprits. After all, this was the task Rexide had given her from the very beginning. He knew she could handle it, and he hoped that her actions would help prove his innocence. He lived quietly, remaining in the shadows, as the palace was worried that his actions could damage the family's image. He was then ordered to go to the distant border, which was punishment for his actions. He lived a quiet life, trying with all his might to preserve the pure name of the Imperial family. However, when he returned, tragedy awaited him. The death of his best friend, the Crown Prince, as well as an accusation of murder. Rosika will be in big trouble if he is accused of murder and executed before he can become emperor. In that case, all his efforts will be in vain, and his fate will be sealed. She noticed that his life was in danger and asked if he understood what she was talking about. There was a lot of hidden meaning in her words, but she hoped that he would understand the seriousness of the situation. She tried to calm him down, telling him not to worry. She was sure that everything would be fine, despite all the difficulties, and he still had a chance to fix everything. The Duke was surprised and looked at her with obvious bewilderment. He had not expected this from her, although she was always confident in her actions. Her words put him in a difficult position, but the girl only said that she always works off her worth. And at that moment, she showed her determination and confidence that she can cope with any situation. As the girl walked down the hall, Owen grabbed her and asked who she was. His gaze was wary, trying to figure out what kind of person dared to walk through the palace so calmly. He demanded to know how she had ended up in these corridors. While keeping her under threat, he was ready to act, to learn everything about her, until he got the information he needed. The girl was surprised when she saw the butler. She did not expect to meet him in such a state, but she remained calm. The situation was not easy, and she needed to be prepared. The Duke, seeing this scene, was also puzzled. He looked at the butler with obvious confusion, not understanding why he was acting like this. There was a harshness in his voice as he shouted at the servant. Owen tried to justify himself, saying that there had been a mistake. The Duke approached the girl and asked if she was okay, trying to figure out what was happening. The girl said that everything was fine, and noticed that the Duke was really worried about her. He was always so attentive and caring, and her calmness could not help but calm him down. The butler noted that the Duke could not simply let go of someone who had so unexpectedly burst into his room early in the morning. Of course, he could not remain indifferent because it was too strange. The Duke was about to hit the butler for his words, but he simply sighed with a smile, as if it was not that important. He was prepared for any consequences, and did not perceive the situation as a threat. The butler apologized, explaining that it was all an instinctive reaction. He sincerely regretted what he had done, and hoped that the girl had not been offended. It had been an accidental misunderstanding. The lady said that everything was fine, because it was a very obvious reaction that could easily be expected from anyone in such a situation. No hard feelings or complaints. Everything was normal and solvable. When he was studying at the assassin school, it was the girl who had the most dangerous assassins. They were all so fragile and beautiful that their abilities made even the most experienced people afraid. The girl asked again, meaning a hired killer, and he confirmed that this was exactly what he meant. He even remembered those people who slept with a knife under their pillow, but they were all powerless against his classmates. He assumed that she found it amazing too, so he didn't trust beautiful women. Despite their appearance, his experience taught him to be careful and not to trust external signs, even if they could be deceiving. The Viper said that she had always known that he was an unusual man. His past was indeed grand and full of dangers, which could not but leave an impression. The butler was amazed how such a beautiful stranger had ended up in His Majesty's castle. He thought she might forgive him, but the girl replied that he should rather be praised for his insight. She was not offended, and his actions seemed entirely justified to her. His Highness's life had become her life, and she hoped that the Duke would continue to take care of him in the future, maintaining his care and attention. However, she did not feel the need to worry about it. The butler apologized for the rudeness of his questions, but he wanted to make sure that this was the real person. The Duke came up and confirmed that this was indeed the man they were expecting. He had already checked this information. The girl admitted that she thought that her cheeks would be torn off from such a misunderstanding, but it turned out that everything was fine. It was a pleasant surprise for her. The Duke asked again if she had any enemies, and if anyone might be displeased with her actions. He wanted to make sure that no one was threatening her, knowing that she might face danger. The girl answered this question with a grin. It was a really stupid question. Considering her past in the world of fraud, she could name so many enemies that she wouldn't have enough fingers on her hands. The girl noticed that this was true, but still asked why he was asking such questions. The Duke replied that it was necessary to prevent any threats and kill them before they could take her life. She couldn't understand why he was so suddenly aggressive. She knew him as a man who wasn't so cruel as to solve problems by killing especially indiscriminately. It seemed strange. She reminded him again that the only people who could be dissatisfied with her were the victims of her fraud, but that didn't matter to the Duke. He wanted her to talk, and he understood a lot about her past, which greatly changed his perception. The Duke was sure that this was not the first time she had found herself in such a situation. He saw the experience in her eyes, which showed that she had faced danger many times. The girl asked him why he was so sure, and he replied that he was convinced by the look on her face when the knife was held to her throat. That look spoke for itself. It did not resemble the face of a confused person. It was as if she had experienced the shock of imminent death many times, and it showed. She smiled slightly, realizing that her behavior had caused such thoughts. She had truly been shocked by many deaths. She admitted that she had in fact died that way more than once. Whatever that meant, the fear and pain of death was familiar to her, and it was part of her past. She said that she was safe now, and they didn't have to worry. Those who threatened her life were no longer alive, and no one knew her true identity anymore. From that day on, they became her only protection. 4 people, including the Duke, were now her protectors. With these 4, there was no need to worry about her safety, because they were ready to deal with any threats. Viper, or Rosika, knew that she had a hard job ahead of her to complete the task that had been given to her. She didn't even have a day to complete the task, but she was ready for it. One of the men, noticing her wound, asked how she was feeling and offered to go to his room to treat it. He promised to help with the treatment, caring for her health. He knew how to deal with simple injuries, but the girl resolutely refused his help. She was sure that she could deal with such a wound herself without needing outside help. After thanking him for his concern, Viper left his room and headed to her own quarters. She preferred to leave all the troubles at the door and return to her familiar world. Her face was beautiful, and that surprised no one. She was a real beauty, whose face would be remembered by anyone who had ever looked at her. It was her genuine natural face. The Duke, noticing her beauty, suddenly exclaimed, asking what good he had done to deserve such a compliment. He could not understand why she was called the most beautiful. In response to this, the Duke loudly protested, asking where his intelligence had gone, that he had become so naive and did not notice the obvious. His bewilderment was noticeable. At this time, the Crown Prince, standing next to Rexide, noticed that he had once said that he envied people like them. He could not forget these words and addressed the Duke with this. Rexide, hearing his words, asked who exactly he was looking at. When he spoke like that, he was clearly interested in his answer, trying to understand what exactly he was talking about. The Duke continued that he probably didn't mean the poor people of their lands who worked day after day to feed themselves. These people were in a difficult situation, but they worked to survive. However, the Crown Prince expressed his point of view. He actually envied these people. They were free, unlike those who were forced to live constantly, thinking about how they looked in the eyes of others. They are not obliged to follow strict and boring rules of etiquette. They should not point their swords at those they love and value, despite the circumstances. Such a life is not for them. It limits their freedom. He said that they could sleep peacefully without worrying about their safety. But Rexide asked why his friend couldn't sleep peacefully. Maybe someone told him that they would kill him, and that was worrying him. If so, he was ready to tear him to pieces. However, the prince asked Rexide to listen to him carefully. He said that he was really having a hard time, and now he needed to understand what exactly was bothering him. He was sure he was still holding up well, but lately it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to cope. The feeling was becoming unbearable. He felt that something was wrong, and he couldn't find a way out. Rexide didn't understand what was happening to him. All he could do was listen carefully, but everything seemed completely strange and absurd. He didn't know what was going on in his friend's soul at that moment. He said his friend was just being a fool. He was spoiled, and all this worrying was a waste of time. He should learn to cope with difficulties and not worry about everything. Rexide continued saying that if his friend lived like normal people, he wouldn't last a day. He would immediately run back to the cozy palace, to his comfortable life without any difficulties. The guy thanked him for these words and admitted that he felt that the time had come. Time to move on. Despite all the difficulties, he decided that it was time to leave this stage of his life. And yet, despite their differences, they had not seen each other for a long time. And when they met, their hearts felt lighter. Sometimes it is precisely such meetings that help to look at life from a different angle, even if only for a while. If only he had a slightly more gentle and patient nature, maybe then his life would have been easier, and he could have gotten rid of the inner burdens that were weighing him down so much faster. Rex had never understood why his friend was acting so stupidly, why he didn't ask him what was bothering him, and how he could help him. It would have been so simple to support him, to understand his condition. But it was too late now. Raven was dead. No, not just gone, killed. And now all that was left was the realization that nothing could be done for their friendship. It was over. The man didn't ask what his master was going to do next. Time was precious, and they didn't have much of it. They had to act quickly to get things done. If the crown prince, who has gone on vacation, does not contact for a long time, then the imperial court will most likely quickly understand that something is wrong with his absence, and that the situation needs to be urgently sorted out. The Duke assured her that she would find a solution and promised that everything would be done. He also informed her that she had shown interest in Raven's handwriting, so he gave her some letters that they had exchanged. Now the butler finally understood what the girl was taking out of his room. However, he became curious about why she needed these letters and began to wonder what she was using them for and how it related to her plans. The Duke admitted that he himself did not know what exactly was going on. He was so stupid that he was forced to hire a swindler, but he still warned that one should not trust the Viper too much and always check her actions. He also added that if there is such an opportunity, then it is worth talking to the girl only in the presence of the butler, so that he can carefully monitor her words and actions without missing important details. The Duke, despite everything that was happening, assured that even if he trusted all the people in the world, he should never trust anyone because this woman made him afraid and wary. However, the girl was pleasantly surprised by the new name the Duke had given her. Rosica was a beautiful name, and she was glad that for the first time someone had chosen her name with such warmth and meaning. She decided to cherish that name and be grateful for the honor, even if the Duke continued to assure Owen that he would never trust her. He still remembered her, despite all his doubts and fears. As she said, she always earned her worth, and that made him smile. Perhaps it meant he had broken his word, but he couldn't deny that her behavior sometimes commanded respect. The girl wished everyone good night, and the Duke turned to the Viper, not forgetting to remind her of the importance of her next step and her role in the upcoming events. The girl, with slight irritation, asked again how long the Duke intended to call her, that she was sure that if anyone heard her, they would immediately think that she was a criminal or a fraud, because her nickname aroused suspicion. The butler nodded and acknowledged that she was right, noting that such nicknames hardly contributed to a good reputation, so he decided to clarify what he should call her so that it would not raise unnecessary questions. The Duke answered calmly that her real name was Rosica. The girl, slightly surprised, immediately asked why there were no servants in this huge palace, since its size at least suggests the presence of staff. The Duke, pursing his lips, explained that there had always been only 4 people in this palace: the maid Masha, her son the butler himself, and of course himself. No one else was needed here due to his personal preferences. He added that he did not need anyone's help, as he preferred his house to be quiet and calm. The girl slightly mockingly asked, why not hire servants considering the size of the castle and its emptiness? She pointed out that the palace is indeed huge, but it feels empty and unwelcoming. There must be at least 50 people there for there to be any movement, as the castle is too big to be so quiet. The Duke was taken aback by such a proposal. The girl, without wasting time, began to list that at least 10 people should work in the kitchen, another 10 for cleaning, 10 for washing, and another 10 for managing all of this. The butler, a little embarrassed, tried to explain that the palace was indeed large, but not so large as to require such massive service. He reminded that the Duke, as before, did not like crowds and could not stand noise. However, the Duke, without losing patience, interrupted him. He ordered that everything be done according to the girl's suggestion. The remaining 10 servants should be chosen from the lower nobility, and servants for more important duties should also be selected. She wanted him to somehow achieve a title that would suit her. That was her plan, but she was sure it would take time and effort. She hoped he would understand her intentions. There is nothing to be done. She has a lot of work to do to make His Majesty a real emperor. She cannot remain in the shadows forever. Eventually, she will need to come to the forefront to take control. To do this, she needs to have the necessary authority to decide important issues and pave the way forward. The butler was curious and asked her what exactly she intended to do that required such authority and effort. The girl replied that she had not yet decided on this matter and needed more time to think it over. This was an important step, and she could not make a decision hastily without thinking through all the details. After all, she was working with a back alley thug, and now it seemed like she was going to be working with the man who would become the emperor. He thought she could quickly come up with a plan, but she wasn't so sure. She was always suspicious, and that was her main quality. No matter what plans she talked about, she always remained cautious and wary. Maybe she just wanted everyone to think that she had caught a simpleton. He had heard that she had taken His Majesty's letters yesterday. This prompted him to ask how she intended to use these documents and what exactly she planned to do with them in the future. The girl replied sarcastically that if he continued to talk to her so much, she would soon feel indigestion. She was not in the mood for long conversations, especially when these conversations began to bore her. The gentleman noticed that she was right. Today he really was chatty like a parrot. This was clearly uncharacteristic of him, and it was probably worth giving her some peace so that she could do her own thing. The Duke declared that they were back at table, and he did not need to finish his meal right now, because he could always ask his questions later, at another time, when it would be more convenient for everyone. But the girl, without losing her cool, replied that if he was so interested, he could come to her later when she was in her room. Then he could find out everything that was bothering him. The butler was silent for a while, thinking about her words. Then he said that he understood her perfectly and agreed with this proposal. There was some thoughtfulness in his tone. He noted that a lot of money had been spent on her, and that all the details needed to be checked carefully. He couldn't just trust her, suspecting that she might be hiding something important. The butler headed to her room, anticipating what awaited him there. When he entered, the girl was already lying on the bed, giving him away in her own way, once again demonstrating her cold-bloodedness. He thought that her behavior might be a result of the recent knife incident. Perhaps she was upset, or maybe she was doing this on purpose to provoke a reaction or confuse him. Rosika smiled and suddenly said, "You said you were an assassin." Her words were spoken with a slight sarcasm, but there was an interest in them, as if she was trying to understand him better. He replied with pride that he was able to cope with any situation quickly and intelligently, and his speech was always well delivered. He considered his dexterity an important quality in life. The butler, slightly surprised by her statement, decided to take it as a compliment. Then the girl, noticing his reaction, raised her head a little and looked at him with a slight challenge in her eyes. The next moment she asked him about his height, and he replied that he was 182 centimeters. Then came the unexpected question, "And what about your weight?" He couldn't understand why she needed this information. The girl continued, noting that if he wanted to look perfect, he needed to lose about 3 kilograms more. These words were spoken with a slight ironic note, but with a clear interest in his appearance. He grinned and said that he was quite happy with his figure and saw no point in making any changes. Hearing this, Rosika smiled slightly, as if enjoying his answer. She said with an undisguised smile that after they finished their business, he would have to gain some weight again. Her words were cryptic, but sounded like something planned. The butler, clearly puzzled, asked what exactly she meant when she said they had to finish. He didn't understand what she was talking about, and her words only confused him more. The girl insisted that he undress, and she expressed it quite directly. She gave the order that he should fulfill her request without asking unnecessary questions, as usually happens in such situations. At this time, the Duke was in his library. She could not understand why he was not there yet. There were so many books and papers in his room that everything merged into one whole, and it was difficult to find something specific. He thought he should clean up the room. There was too much junk, and even he who was used to disorder was beginning to notice how it was interfering with his normal work. This needed to be fixed. The Duke tried to find something on the table, but his search was unsuccessful. He leafed through papers and moved books, but found nothing suitable. It seemed that all traces had disappeared somewhere. Remembering her words, he realized that she was interested in the Crown Prince's letters. She said that if he had such letters, she would be pleased to receive them because she really wanted to see them. Looking at the other table, he picked up a few papers and realized that he had no one else to correspond with. It was strange because just recently there had been a lot of letters, but now everything had somehow calmed down. The Duke picked up several letters and began to read. One of them said that spring had apparently already arrived. Tulips had blossomed in the palace garden, symbolizing a declaration of love. Raven also mentioned in the letter that he thought Rexide didn't understand how hard it was to expect that kind of sensuality from him. It wasn't the first thought he had expressed about his friend. He wrote that when men fall in love, they often give tulips. It was a confession that was always accompanied by these flowers, and it was a sign of special significance for both parties. Raven continued that until his dying day, he wanted to see Rex do the same thing, give tulips. When he confessed, he hoped that the letter would arrive soon and everything would be okay. But he couldn't understand why he had to go to a small kingdom to suppress a rebellion. It was a strange mission, and it didn't meet his expectations. The letter also talked about how Raven really wanted to see his friend. He felt that in order to meet someone as important as Rexide, he should go on a journey himself rather than wait for him to arrive. He assured her that he would be on his way soon and would try to tell Rex many things. It was an important event, and he felt that the long-awaited meeting would give their relationship new meaning. Raven also asked how Rex was doing. He sincerely hoped that he was okay, because not only his personal fate depended on it, but the fate of many other people as well. In his last letter, he shared his thoughts about age. He wrote that the older he got, the more confused he became about his feelings. The world around him seemed to be changing, and this worried him greatly. He greatly missed the days when he and his brother Raven lived in the Imperial palace. Those were the times when they felt like they were part of a great family and had each other's constant support. During those times, he often asked Rex how he was coping with the responsibilities he had taken on. It was important for both of them, because every day in the palace was full of events and responsibilities. But as time went on, the Duke began to experience strange moments. He began to see hallucinations, as if his brother was nearby, writing him letters, telling him about his sufferings and difficulties. In one of these letters, he found blurred drops, like tears. These were words full of pain and experiences. The Duke put his whole soul into these lines, telling how hard it was for him, without the support of a loved one. Rexide wondered what he should say to such a letter. He felt that every line was important, and he did not know how to express his feelings in response to support his brother in this difficult moment. He opened another letter, but he wasn't sure if it was a real letter from Ray. His heart was pounding because he didn't know how to take these strange and disturbing messages. The letter from Prince Raven said that he was no longer suffering, no longer sad. He was happy, but he was worried that his friend was alone. He hoped that he would find comfort, even if he was not there. The Duke was absolutely horrified when he read the lines of the letter. They said that his friend should not grieve for his death for long, because Raven wanted him to be happy and live a full life. The prince asked his friend to be happy for the next 2 days, until they met again. These words were such that the Duke could not help but wonder what was really going on. Rex was sure that this letter was written by his brother Raven. He knew his handwriting and style. The feelings embedded in the letter were too close to be a mistake. He was absolutely certain that these words came from Raven. It was impossible to imagine that anyone else could write with such sincerity and such deep emotion. At that moment, the door swung open, and Rosica walked into the room. She was shocked by what she saw, and her face reflected unimaginable amazement when she saw the letter. She immediately turned to His Highness, and noticing the expression on his face, realized that something important had happened. Rosica was shocked by everything that was happening. Rexide turned to her, and his face expressed fear. He was clearly scared. It was obvious that he was worried and did not know how to react to everything that was happening around him. He asked her with concern how she had managed to obtain this letter. He could not understand how she could have ended up in this place, and how it was possible that she was holding such important words in her hands. He begged Rosica to tell him how and when she had received this letter. His eyes were full of fear because in these lines was hidden the answer to questions that he could not find himself. Rexide continued to press, asking her to explain how she was connected to this letter. His voice was full of worry, desperate for clarification. Rosica looked at the letter, and the butler noticed that she was truly incredible. He couldn't understand how she could have ended up in this situation and what she was going to do about it now. She turned to the butler and asked him to give her a minute. She felt she needed some time to process everything that was happening and decide what to do next. The butler, in turn, believed that the letter should be sent to the Imperial Palace as soon as possible. He understood the importance of this message, but did not know what was actually going to happen. He was surprised that Rexide was here in this place, but he was even more surprised that the gentleman looked more tense and agitated than ever before. The butler couldn't understand why Rexide had such a tense look. He felt that something important and disturbing was about to happen, but he didn't know what it was. Rosica sighed heavily, and the butler suddenly remembered something important. He began to suspect that this moment could be decisive in the fate of everyone involved in this strange story. The butler, with some excitement, said that the gentleman must definitely look at this letter, as it was simply amazing. He could not understand exactly where it came from, but the impression was strong. The butler also looked at himself in the mirror and was surprised he did not expect to see such a reaction. But strangely enough, the Duke suddenly came up to him and hugged him tightly, which puzzled him even more. The Duke kept thinking that there might be a chance, a possibility, that the Crown Prince had actually returned, even though everyone around him knew it was almost impossible. But apparently he was so sure that he believed in a miracle. However, despite all the doubts, the Duke was more willing to believe in a miracle than to look for a rational explanation for what was happening. He was convinced that this was the very moment when the incredible became reality. He casually called the butler Raven, but he smiled and said that it was not so. It was not His Highness, and he could not accept such an address, despite the strange situation. A female voice suddenly came from behind, and the girl standing there said that it was indeed not the Crown Prince. She was confident in her statement and clearly had no intention of letting the Duke be mistaken. The Duke, shocked and confused with tears in his eyes, laughed nervously, trying to hide his feelings. He did not know how to react, but everything that was happening was putting pressure on his nerves. He admitted that this was indeed the case, but he still could not understand where this letter came from. His doubts and worries continued to grow, and the question remained unanswered. The Duke was sure that the letter had been written by Raven himself. He continued to believe this, despite the absurdity of the situation, and did not even want to think about how it could have been otherwise. But the girl, with patience and calmness, said that she had written it. She was the only one who could help, and she did it in order to support the Duke in his aspirations. She said that in order to help him, she had to copy the Crown Prince's handwriting, because that was the only way she could approach the problem. She did all this with the best of intentions. With a sincere apology, she added that she had not intended to offend him. She had not thought that it would cause such emotions in the Duke, and she was ready to apologize for any possible misunderstandings. The Duke, after a few seconds of thought, understood her. He sighed deeply, as if relieved, and without further ado, threw the letter on the floor, forgetting all the worries it had caused. In the evening, standing on the balcony, he smoked a cigar, lost in thought. The butler, noticing his habit, reminded him that he had quit smoking long ago, but now it was the only thing that helped him cope. Today, the owner decided to continue his habits, again, immersing himself in old affairs. His attention was riveted to something important, and he could not be distracted, despite what was happening around him. The butler, observing his behavior, could not help asking. He wondered what had prompted her to write such a letter. He realized that it had been a great surprise for him, almost a shock. She admitted that she now regrets this action. At that moment, she wanted to check whether she could forge the handwriting so skillfully as to mislead even the Majesty himself. Looking back now, she realized that it was an unnecessary action. At the time, she had no idea that all of this would be beyond her control and become such a major part of events. She and the Crown Prince were born in the same year in the Imperial Palace and spent their entire childhood together, communicating, playing, and learning about the world. This brought them closer together, and they became inseparable friends from a very early age. When the master came to the lands of Draxx, the Crown Prince, despite his busy schedule, often visited them. These visits always brought joy and excitement to their homes, strengthening the friendship between them. Their relationship was always marked by sincerity and respect. This was evident from the way they often exchanged letters, in which they did not hide their feelings and thoughts, trusting each other more than anyone else. When the Crown Prince died, the owner, in deep shock, sank into apathy. A strange coincidence. It all happened right on the way to the lands of Draxx, for which he was responsible. The lady believed that what had happened was part of someone's carefully planned intrigue, aimed at accusing His Majesty of murdering the Crown Prince, disrupting everything they had built for so long. The butler noted that at first this did not bother him much. He was overcome by inner unrest, and false accusations or other problems could not distract him from his condition. He was not himself, as if lost in his thoughts and experiences. Today, despite the outward calm, the situation had not changed much, and he remained just as depressed. He continued to pretend that everything was fine, hiding his pain, but his face and actions said otherwise. He could not forget the death of his friend, who was once close to him. The butler asked her if she knew why the master often stood in front of this birch tree. He noted that it was a habit that had taken root in him and could not help but arouse interest. The girl did not know the answer, so she asked about it. The butler said that when he first came here, this birch was the first gift that the Crown Prince brought for his friend the owner. It was a young birch sapling, and he knew it had been planted there as a symbol of something new, perhaps, for both of them. This moment was like a new chapter in their lives. The butler turned to the lady and said that it seemed that she could not handle the sapling because she was tormented by remorse. It was obvious from her face she felt uncomfortable. It was strange, because she had previously been involved in fraud, destroying the lives of entire families for her own gain. She never thought about the consequences of her actions, did not pay attention to the troubles of others. She spent other people's fortunes as if it were her right, even if they were earned through sweat and blood. All she wanted was to earn more, and she did not think about the moral side of her actions. But now that she was faced with real remorse, it was a completely new experience for her. She didn't know what it meant. Something inside her suddenly changed, and she felt uneasy. It was a completely unfamiliar feeling. She had never experienced anything like it, and she found it difficult to understand what was happening to her. It was like an awakening, and she could find no explanation. The Duke continued to smoke his cigarette calmly until the Viper, as he called her, approached him. He looked at her with interest, not surprised by her appearance. The Duke asked what she wanted and threw his cigarette on the ground. But the Viper said he didn't have to quit smoking for her. She wasn't going to interfere with his habits. However, he replied that he did not want to smoke anymore and asked what made her go out on such a cold night, especially in such a light dress. It was strange. She, despite the cold, replied that everything was happening this way because she had not been able to apologize to him properly. It was a sincere confession, not just words, but real emotions. She simply wanted to apologize and explain that she hadn't meant to make fun of him. He said he knew that, and that his behavior wasn't out of anger, but rather because she needed to get back into the warmth. She remained silent, but he expressed his concern again, adding that perhaps she thought he could work properly if he had a cold. It made no sense, of course, but his words had a caustic undertone. The girl remained silent again. He looked at her with obvious contempt, not understanding why she was silent and what she was feeling. All this irritated him, but he did not delve into the conversation. In the end, he decided to do it his way. He took off his cloak and offered to let her put it on instead of standing in the cold. It was a caring gesture despite its severity. She began to talk about the crown prince, wondering what he might do if he were next to his friend now, and what exactly he would say in response to his actions at such a moment. Deep down, she thought that perhaps the last time he would say these exact words to his friend would be the last time he would show his attention and care. If her words had upset him in any way, she sincerely regretted it, as it had not been her intention. She was ready to apologize if it might upset him. He responded with a small smile, looking up at the sky. He said that everything was fine, and it didn't bother him, trying to reassure her and show that everything was under control. The girl tried again to explain that she was truly sorry if her words had caused unpleasant emotions. She did not want to leave him in such a state. But he, not wanting to continue this conversation, simply squeezed everything in his hands and said that in fact, she was still better than him. These words sounded without unnecessary emotions, as if detached. They had never met, never spoken. But she felt she knew him much better than he knew himself. She saw how he worried and could understand him without words. She was sure that Raven probably cried when he wrote his last letter. And that's what she felt, even without seeing him. There was some special connection in her heart with him. She lowered her eyes, not knowing what to answer. Her thoughts were confused, and her feelings were deep. She did not want to say too much, but it was also difficult to remain silent. Then he began to laugh. His laugh was not evil, but rather relieved, as if he had finally realized that he had forgotten to answer the letter the girl had spoken of. He added that it wasn't really just Raven that he felt that way about. He realized that he hadn't tried to understand him and had never tried to comfort him. He was too busy with himself. The girl asked what the crown prince was really like, what was hidden behind his image. She was looking for answers, realizing that every person is more than what seems at first glance. The Duke thought about his friend, whom he considered almost a brother, and often recalled the moments spent with him. It was Raven for him. This man was an important figure despite their differences. Raven van Hexen, the Duke's older brother, was his best friend. Despite his seniority, the relationship between them was as if they were peers and shared many things. Although Raven sometimes seemed like a younger brother, that the Duke wanted to protect his features were soft and gentle. Raven was a kind person who often showed vulnerability, which was noticeable to everyone. He cried often, which was not surprising for the Duke. From the letters one could understand how emotional Raven was, who did not hide his feelings and experiences. Raxid's mother died shortly after his birth, and he grew up without true parental warmth and care. This left a mark on his life, and he always felt a lack of this important love. Unlike Rexid, Raven had an Empress who acted as a mother figure supporting him, which made his friend envious. Rexid always envied this because he never had the chance to experience something like this. Even though Rax tried to hide his feelings, he was well aware that his friend was jealous. He noticed it in the way Raven was always surrounded by care, unlike him. When Raven was still a small boy at the age of 6, he began to call his father Emperor. This expression of respect was his way of understanding his place in the world. his connection to power. Raven's mother called Her Majesty Empress because that was the custom. Raven was surprised to hear that Raven had started doing that at such a young age and wondered about the meaning of those words. The Duke laughed, noting that Raven probably just felt sorry for Draxx. He also added that Raven was terribly afraid of his father, the previous emperor, and always tried to please him. Even when Raven was scolded, he could not stand aside. He always admitted his mistakes so that they would share the blame with him, and often cried, worrying about it. They said he lied when he said he was the one who suggested his friend skip class and go play. However, that was an important point. Sometimes it is better to be together than to do useless nonsense. The girl asked, what was it about that sentence that could be difficult? The gentleman replied that his friend was incredibly kind and was always there when he needed support. He didn't know how he knew it, but he always knew when something was bothering him, and every time he was having trouble, he could talk to him about it, and it brought relief. It was amazing when you thought about it. Raven never left him alone. His constant support and attention were like an anchor in his turbulent world, giving him the strength to survive any trials. Draxx never felt that he was in trouble, because he was confident in his strength and ability to protect his friend. But as it turned out, he was mistaken, believing that everything can be solved only by force. Despite all his resilience, Draxx could not hide his inner fear and pain. He was on the edge, but even in these moments when he needed support, there was no one who could comfort him. When his friend died, Draxx didn't know what exactly could help him at that moment. So deciding to understand what was bothering him the most, he asked the girl what was bothering her about this issue. He thought it would be better if his friend hated him like that stupid Raven. After all, he couldn't bear the pain of loss, much less hurt someone else. He was too sensitive himself. The girl agreed with his opinion. Crown Prince Raven was indeed the kind of person who preferred to hide his feelings, not showing true pain, leaving others to think that he was invincible. She thought that if Raven knew that there was someone around him who could understand his pains and worries, he might be a little more open and honest about his feelings. She could be that person. In the lead up to his death, she understood how much pain Raven was in his friend's death had left a deep wound in him, and she could understand how hard it was for him to bear that burden, what was truly causing him to suffer. She would try to comfort him, find the right words to help him cope with it. And Draxx, having lost his friend, continued to struggle with himself, but his mind and soul were in turmoil. Draxx continued to act strangely and awkwardly, as if he was losing his mind from grief. The girl, noticing this, suggested that they wait. She noticed how dust got into his eyes and decided that perhaps this upset him. She gently wiped away his tears and told him that he should think better of the fact that His Majesty the Crown Prince had always wished her only happiness and continued to wish the same at this moment. After all, the Crown Prince, as a kind and gentle man, would never wish for anyone to take revenge for him, since revenge would only lead to more suffering. He, however, began to say something trying to justify his feelings, but the girl quickly interrupted him, stating that she categorically disagreed with his thoughts. She didn't want to convince him to give up his revenge, but she definitely wanted him to stop blaming himself for the man's death. She offered him to fulfill the Crown Prince's last wish so that he could calm down and find peace in his soul. The Crown Prince's wish was clear. The Duke had to be happy, and she was going to help him achieve this. If Draxx's heart can only be calmed by doing something with him, then she is willing to help, promising to find a way to make him happy. If he decides to catch the criminal and lock him up forever, she is ready to help him with this. And if he wants to fulfill the Crown Prince's cherished wish, she will also be there. That was the reason she was by his side. There was nothing she couldn't do to achieve his goal. Lady Ravita has been given the title that is usually given to the direct relatives of Duke Draxx. It is the title of princess, and she will be first in line to succeed the head of the Draxx family. The title was originally intended to go to either the Duke's sister or his daughter, but fate decreed otherwise. This was an unexpected turn of events, as other family members were awaiting the choice. However, Duke Rexide himself, known for his decisiveness, declared that he would do as he decided. And although the girl objected, he could not understand why she was so opposed to this decision. For the Duke, this decision made no sense, because he did not think that it would somehow affect the girl. After all, after she helped him become emperor, she might have to return to her old business. He guessed that the reason for her displeasure was different, but she still said that it all seemed too strange to her. She could not understand how a new successor had suddenly appeared, and it all seemed incredibly confusing, especially since the chosen candidate is a person who spends most of the year on the battlefield. And what's more, she is not a man but a woman. This seemed completely ridiculous, and in general her origins looked dubious. This decision raised many questions, as it made everyone wonder what exactly Duke Rex was planning. But in his eyes, it was a logical step to appoint a woman as his heir. The whole world knew that the Duke was not interested in marriage, but not in the Imperial palace, where its own rules and dogmas reigned. This fact was well known among the nobility, but remained a secret to the majority. It is not surprising that the Duke was not only not interested in marriage, but even avoided it. He was considered a man who had not entered into a single union, which meant that he had an indisputable successor, which removed many questions. Everyone around will probably think that the owner, who can't stand unnecessary worries and prefers minimalism, chose the most obvious color for her. She thinks that this is exactly how it is. It is a logical choice. When His Majesty, a man accustomed to life on the battlefield, suddenly appointed a woman as his successor, it caused confusion among many. In the eyes of those around him, it looked like an attempt to settle the situation and simply close the matter. The butler noted that this was quite possible, although he thought that appointing a woman as successor was too hasty. It might well suit the Archduke, who was not inclined to waste time on unnecessary thoughts and details. In any case, this is the version they will spread to the public. John also noted that the title princess would be most appropriate for her new role, because this is exactly what she represents in their eyes. He felt the tension, realizing the gravity of what would come next. After all, when all these things were completed, he intended to drive her out of the family, leaving her with no important status or rights. After he himself becomes emperor, he will offer her the opportunity to return the title, if she herself wants, but this will be at his discretion, and her position in this matter will depend solely on his decision. It was quite a tempting offer, as the title of princess was perhaps the safest place for her in the current circumstances. It had the power behind it to ensure her safety. She agreed without hesitation, and then signed all the necessary documents, realizing that her fate would now depend on this decision and the title she would receive. In gratitude for all he had done, she asked him to take care of her, and as a sign of special affection called him Daddy, which was another step in their relationship. He choked, and the girl didn't immediately understand what had happened. He choked when she said the word Daddy, which clearly confused him. It was clearly not a word he was accustomed to. The girl noticed that the age difference between them was only 4 years. Sometimes it seemed to her that she was going a little overboard trying to build conversations with him, as if he were older people. Perhaps she should start calling him little brother, she thought. It would fit their age context perfectly and cause far less confusion on his part. He groaned again, and the girl noticed that his face was bright red. He looked like he wanted to sink into the ground, embarrassed, trying to comprehend what had happened. Rex van Hessen was third in line to the throne, and his influence on the main political circles was undoubtedly great. There were always many rumors, intrigues, and important meetings around him. He was not only smart, but also strong. Although he often seemed rather simple-minded, she thought that his brain had muscles too, and that he knew how to fight not only with words, but also on the battlefield. She also noted in the letter that he was a bonfire, but as soon as he noticed it, she quickly began to erase those words, realizing that he might not like them. A slight irony remained in her soul. She assumed that the palace should have sent a reply letter by now, confirming that they had received her message. It should have been quick and without delay, but she was still a little worried. The gentleman said that he had already returned, and that after receiving her letter, the process from the Imperial Palace would take about 2 months to reach the lands of Draxx. The waiting time was considerable, but unavoidable. They agreed that they would call the Imperial Knights to show off the living crown prince. She was not worried about this plan, because it was all designed to show everyone that the prince was alive and well. He was going to invite the nobles of the northern region, so the girl had to take that into consideration. Although she would only be the heir in name, they still had to announce the arrival of the princess, even if her role was symbolic. The girl decided to ask him if she could ask him why he never got married. It seemed curious, especially considering his situation. The question was not casual. She really wanted to understand the reasons. The Duke, noticing her curiosity, asked why he was so interested in this girl. She explained that it was important to her because it was not every day that important figures were asked such a personal question, and she could not ignore it. All this is connected with the fact that marriages among aristocrats are often used for diplomatic purposes. For the Duke, who aspires to become an emperor, such a step would be useful. This understanding made the girl think about the real motives. The Duke replied that he had no particular reason to marry. She thought that perhaps he had never met the right person. However, she could not fully believe his words, that he simply did not want to. Aristocrats usually marry for a variety of reasons: to restore the family line, to improve their position, or even to find true love. But if the marriage conditions do not match these goals, then such a union is unlikely to be consummated for love. There were many aristocrats in the government, but even more in the imperial family. It would be interesting to know why the crown prince remained single until he was 25. It was strange because such questions usually did not go unexplained in such a high circle. He had a beloved girl, probably the one who would play the role of the Empress. However, despite her importance, he was not the typical man who would simply abandon his beloved for another union. He thought that he had many other things that were causing him pain. But of course, the most important was the prince's blood. It was obvious that Her Highness had more than 1 or 2 things that were causing him headaches. Rosica, watching him, thought that he probably had reasons not to marry, and it was most likely connected with something personal. After all, the name he gave her was not accidental. It was not just the first one that came to mind. Intrigued, she decided to find out more about Rosica. He turned away and said that she was not just a constant companion, but a person with whom he would not dare to build anything serious. She replied with a smile that he shouldn't joke, and it seemed that there was a woman he was trying to keep quiet about, and her name was Rosica. Was he hiding something, or was it just a fantasy? But he explained that it was not as she thought. If he ever had a daughter, he wanted to name her Rosica. It was just a guess about the future, nothing more. Rosica noted that if he had already thought of a name for his daughter, then perhaps he was not so against the wedding. All this indicated that he would probably decide to get married someday, but right now it was not so important. The girl assumed that this meant that although he was not thinking about marriage now, if someone came along who interested him, he might well make a decision and marry her in the future. In order to become emperor, he had to fill the vacancy of the archduchess. She asked him to throw a magnificent reception in honor of her joining the family to make the event as festive as possible. She wanted to invite all the aristocrats in the area to congratulate her. This was a moment that deserved attention, and she didn't want to miss the chance to demonstrate her importance. The young girl who became a princess, thanks to a lucky acquaintance with a duke, will now behave like a little child. She enjoyed the moment, doing what she liked and doing everything that brought joy. But aristocrats alone were not enough for the celebration. She thought it would be boring without congratulations from high-ranking persons. So she decided to accept congratulations from the king, queen, and the prince himself. The Duke asked again if the girl really wanted to invite King Ravita. He was surprised by her request because the decision could affect the entire course of events. He waited for her to clarify her intentions. The girl confirmed her request, but the Duke expressed doubts. He noted that Ravita came from a barbarian family without proper upbringing, and that the king could be rude in his treatment. The girl calmly replied that if Ravita behaved inappropriately, he himself could shut him up. The Duke, in turn, began to say that even if everyone united against Ravita, he would still defeat everyone. She reminded him that the small kingdoms and their rulers might not be planning to attack right now, but they were keeping a close eye on the situation, gathering and observing without doing anything. Of course, she knew that if there hadn't been such a strong leader as Draxx, they would have broken through into the Empire's territory long ago. Without him, the borders would have been destroyed, and mad activity would have begun. She couldn't help but notice that Draxx was truly an incredible person. Even if she exaggerated a little, everything she said was true. This man had a special majesty and strength. It was because of Draxx that the Empire could stand unconquered. It was a reliable defense against the northern countries, the small kingdoms that watched everything with interest, ready to intervene in case of weakness. Ravita was the most powerful of the minor kingdoms, and their strength could play a significant role now. However, the Duke reminded them that Rosica had never met them in person. He warned them that the Ravitans were extremely rude and used to doing as they pleased. Rosica calmly replied that it was not scary. If someone dared to say something unpleasant about her, she would definitely tell him about it. She was clearly not afraid of possible ridicule or rudeness. She understood perfectly well that the Duke could not be with her all the time, watching over her every second, but she did not demand it. She knew that he trusted her to handle situations on her own. However, when she looked at him, she noticed that he looked worried. His expression was like that of a caring bird carefully guarding its chick. This moment even amused her a little. However, it was time to leave the unnecessary talk and get down to business. They could not waste time on empty thoughts. An important discussion awaited them ahead. With so many servants in the estate, Rosica immediately noticed that it now looked more like a place where people actually lived, rather than a dull fortress. Everything looked more lively, if a little unusual. However, the Duke was irritated. He was not used to this kind of thing. And what irritated him even more was that he was about to meet an aristocrat. This was the first time he had ever done this, and so he was now forced to learn etiquette, which he was completely unaccustomed to. The more the Duke thought about it, the more horrified he became. He couldn't understand how this was connected with etiquette, because in his opinion, Rosica was simply leading him by the nose, passing off some strange things as rules. At this point, Owen the butler came over to ask how the training was going. The Duke stared at him in obvious shock, then annoyed that he must have forgotten his eyes at home to think everything was going well. Rosica chuckled and shook her head, advising the Duke to watch his words. Her gaze was mocking, as if she knew in advance how events would unfold next. She then asked Owen to demonstrate one of the examples to the Duke, mentioning that a certain remark was about to follow, connected with a thief. The butler turned to Rosica and asked her an unexpected question. Was her father a thief? The girl froze, blinking in confusion, and then smiled tensely, trying to hide her confusion. She replied that she didn't understand what he was talking about, but Owen just smirked and continued explaining that how else could her father have stolen all the stars from the sky and placed them in her eyes. Rosica flushed, but pretended that she was pleased to hear such words, although deep down she felt awkward. But the Duke was literally shocked by this scene. He was shocked and, with obvious indignation, declared that he definitely could not do that. Owen raised his eyebrows in surprise, shocked that the Duke couldn't even say such a simple phrase. Rosica looked at him in confusion, not understanding why this was so difficult for him. The Duke, although he was a little slow-witted, even began to realize that this etiquette lesson was somehow strange. He opened the book and read the following example. They say that all the confectionaries of the world went bankrupt because the sweetness of Rosica eclipsed their products. He frowned as he continued reading. It read, "I don't understand what you're doing here. You're an angel who will protect heaven while you're gone." Owen chuckled and noted that it sounded more like a commander's speech before a battle. Rosika sighed heavily, reminding him that they had been training for 3 days now, but the Duke was not making any progress. The Duke exploded with indignation, declaring that even a complete simpleton could see that these phrases were intended to seduce girls. He demanded why he was being taught such things. Rosika calmly replied that everything was simple. He had to learn how to seduce a girl. The Duke narrowed his eyes slyly and grinned. Now everything was clear. She had finally revealed her true face, a fraud. He leaned forward, wondering who exactly he was supposed to seduce. But Rosika just remained silent, not rushing to give an answer. A moment later, she calmly announced that his target was Princess Ravita. The Duke stood up and said that she seemed to have gone mad. The girl noted that he said that he wanted to avenge the death of the crown prince and become emperor. All of this was part of her plan, so he should follow it. But the gentleman said he wasn't going to do that, so she asked again if he really was sure of it, and then she asked again if he thought about it before answering. He started shouting and saying that a new successor would be needed, so she tells him to get his hands on the small kingdom and be recognized as the successor. She noticed that he really understood everything well. The gentleman noticed that she did not think about it at all. From the side of Princess Ravita, she tells him to marry a woman he has no feelings for, so he doesn't understand what the princess did wrong. Rosika said that if he did the same to her, then he might actually fall in love with her. The Duke began to say that it was impossible to do this just by wanting to. The girl asked him to listen to her and began to talk about the fact that all members of noble families conduct dynastic marriages. This is a well-known practice. The Duke said that he knew about it. Raven also had a headache because of all these marriage issues. Because of the stress, he seemed to have aged 10 years. Rosika told him not to let it get to the point where he too starts to get a headache, and that he should learn everything. He has no good or anything, no power in political circles, no connections. In order for a prince like him, who has nothing to be able to rise to the top, only this method will do. If he is not ready to make even such a sacrifice, then it is better to give up everything right now. The day that many had been waiting for had finally arrived. The majestic procession of the royal family of Ravita crossed the borders of the duchy, approaching the place of celebration. Their arrival marked the beginning of a long-awaited event, for which they had been preparing with special trepidation. Among all the small kingdoms, only Ravita had the honor of being present at the celebration. This meant that they were recognized as special, which caused them indescribable delight. Being invited into the inner circle was a great honor for them, and therefore they felt incredibly happy. They were especially pleased that, unlike the noble guests from the north, who were supposed to arrive on the day of the celebration, they were given special attention. This once again emphasized their privileged position and importance in the eyes of the host. To show Ravita the respect he deserved, they were asked to arrive early, 2 days before the celebration began. This gesture emphasized the importance of their presence, making them feel truly special among all the guests. The game had begun. Everything that had been planned had to be realized. Now it was time to act. From this moment on, every step mattered. Every word could influence the further course of events. Rosika looked at the Duke carefully and said softly that if he was still in a bad mood, she would not like him to be angry. She tried to speak calmly, letting him know that she had no intention of irritating him or causing him displeasure. She also expressed her sincere regret that she had forced him to do something he did not want to do. It had not been her intention at all, but circumstances had developed in such a way that she had had to insist. She hoped that he would understand her intentions correctly. However, the Duke suddenly admitted his guilt. He said with a slight grin that he should apologize for his behavior because he behaved like a child. In response, the girl asked him to try again, offering to practice together a little bit beforehand. The Duke agreed, although he seemed to be thinking about something, choosing his words. At that moment, he looked completely different, not like usual. He was surprisingly nice, almost charming, and there was no denying that he was a really attractive man. Suddenly, he looked up and a little embarrassed, but with a hint of playfulness, asked her if her father was a thief. This unexpected question caught her off guard, and she was taken aback for a second, not knowing how to react. Pretending not to understand what he was talking about, she asked him with slight bewilderment what exactly he meant. However, her intuition told her that this was some kind of trick, but the solution was still elusive. If she thought about it, she might have a decent answer. However, before she said a word, she decided to wait for the Duke to explain. The question was too strange to give a serious answer right away. The Duke hesitated for a moment, but then gathering his resolve, he spoke. He looked at her carefully and said that the stars, they really were all here. There was sincere conviction in his voice, but Rosika still didn't understand what he was getting at. Frowning, she asked him again what he meant. The Duke looked confused, but explained anyway. He was saying that her father must have stolen all the stars from the sky and placed them in her eyes. Immediately after these words, the Duke suddenly jumped up and started running back and forth as if trying to hide his embarrassment. Rosika simply watched him, not knowing how to react to this. She blushed slightly, looking at him with slight surprise. Having collected her thoughts a little, the girl asked him to stop and listen to her. She wanted to say that his phrase sounded not bad at all. On the contrary, there was something in it. He may not have understood it himself, but he did it quite well. No one knows what might happen in the future, so she explained to him that the most important thing is to just do as he has learned. Don't get hung up on details. The main thing is sincerity, then everything will look natural. Hearing this, the Duke literally blossomed. He was delighted with the thought that this was enough and that his efforts had not been in vain. At that moment he was completely confident in himself and believed that he had passed the test with honor. Rosika confirmed his suspicions, letting him know that he had indeed succeeded. This visibly pleased him, and he sighed with relief, as if a heavy burden had just been lifted from his shoulders. He tried his best, but in the end, he couldn't say the right phrase in a gentle tone. She should have pointed it out directly, but looking at him, she couldn't. At that moment, he looked so cute that even her own thoughts were confused. For some reason, her consciousness seemed to shut down, and her head went blank. She couldn't gather her thoughts, and the words just wouldn't come to her mind. This moment completely threw her off balance. The gentleman felt sincere gratitude to the Duke for his invitation. This gesture was important to him because the trip to the castle provided an opportunity to discuss key issues and strengthen ties. The Duke, in turn, was also grateful that his master had not been lazy and had made such a long journey to Draxx. He knew that the journey could be tiring, but he understood its importance. Rexid noted that he hoped that their time together in the castle would be beneficial. He wished for their relationship to become stronger and for their trust in each other to grow stronger. The man looked at the Duke with slight bewilderment as he noticed that there was a girl standing behind him. Her presence raised questions in his mind, as he had not expected to see anyone else there. Rosika peered out from behind the Duke's broad frame, careful not to attract too much attention. Her gaze met the gentleman's, and she studied his expression carefully. Without losing her dignity, the girl greeted His Majesty with respect. She made a smooth bow, showing respect and observing all the rules of etiquette accepted at court. The man froze, for a moment, amazed at who he saw. He had not expected to meet a princess here, and realizing this, he warmly remarked that he was very glad to meet her in person. The Duke, watching him, couldn't help but think, if this giant wanted, he could simply blow away Rosika with one breath. The difference in their sizes was impressive. The girl introduced herself in a calm, confident voice. She expressed her sincere gratitude for his kindness and for taking the time to visit their castle, showing such respect. The king replied, with a slight smile, that they had brought Ravita's treasures as a token of congratulations. He hoped that these gifts would please her and would be a valuable gift for her. Their presence alone was significant to her, but to receive such luxurious gifts was unexpected. Now she felt completely forgiven before him. Reading the history of the kingdom of Ravita, she wanted to meet this man more and more. but she couldn't even imagine that he would so easily accept their invitation and come himself. The gentleman was amazed by this discovery. He did not expect that the princess had studied the history of their country so deeply. This clearly spoke of her inquisitive mind and curiosity. Ravita's story was little known even among her subjects. It seemed all the more surprising that a young aristocrat from another empire was reading it, and with such interest. Of course, this was admirable. Few people paid attention to these notes, and even less so, people who had nothing to do with Ravita. Her knowledge was pleasantly surprising. Rosica shared with delight that she was particularly impressed by the exploits of the first king. When she read about his exploits, she got goosebumps from admiration. She especially remembered his famous phrase, "If a man must die, then let it be on the battlefield," and also the part where the head of the times of frost was mentioned. The king laughed, noting that he was pleasantly surprised that a noble lady from a distant empire had shown such a keen interest in the history of a wild state. He had not expected that someone from the aristocracy would want to learn about the past of his people. Rosica replied that if no one had told her this story, she would never have learned about all this in her life, and such knowledge is priceless. Isn't it a pity to lose the opportunity to learn something that can change your view of the world? She then reminded the king that he himself had spoken of the deep connection between Ravita and Draxx. Moreover, he had personally chosen a book for her that detailed this story, so he too thought it was important. She watched his reaction carefully, waiting for confirmation. However, the king seemed unsure when he had said it. Then Rosica leaned forward impatiently and asked the question more insistently, demanding an answer. Finally, the man admitted that he had indeed been looking for the book for a long time. The king remarked that it was a great honor for his people to see a man who was so interested in their history and of his own free will. The princess standing nearby really did look refined and beautiful. It seemed that she was the epitome of grace and nobility. The others should learn from her, since they had the chance to be near her. But Rosica hastened to assure that she was being overly praised. There are certainly many people in the empire who dream of meeting the heirs of great warriors and learning their history personally. The duke, watching her words, closely noted that Rosica was masterfully playing the game. At that moment, the king's daughter appeared behind them. She noticed with slight surprise that Rosica was actually very small. The princess wondered if all the girls in the empire were really that short. She had never met anyone so petite, and she found it quite curious. The duke frowned, finding such words extremely rude. Was it possible to tell a person so bluntly that he was small at the first meeting? It was simply disrespectful. But Rosica only smiled good-naturedly, answering that the princess was indeed incredibly tall. The girl explained that in her kingdom, almost all the people were of such impressive height. She had even heard that many in the empire were uncomfortable around tall people. But Rosica admitted that from the moment she arrived at the castle, her attention was focused only on the princess. She just couldn't stop admiring her. How amazing that someone could look so stunning. The princess asked again, puzzled, and Rosica, becoming more and more engrossed, continued. In her opinion, her height made her even more majestic. She imagined her launching an arrow on the battlefield, and her heart began to beat wildly. These words surprised the princess, and she asked how Rosica knew that she could shoot a bow. In response, she said with a smile that the princess was the most famous archer among women in the kingdom of Ravita. So if she didn't mind, Rosica would gladly take the chance to learn how to at least hold a bow correctly. She didn't expect much, but it would be great to try. Of course, she didn't even hope to become a good shooter, but it would be great to understand at least a little how to handle a gun. The princess stated with ease and without a shadow of a doubt that it was not difficult at all. She promised that she would certainly help in this matter, because teaching someone to use a bow is not such a difficult task. The duke watched her manner of speaking carefully. He thought that her thoughts were quite insightful, even though she was posing as a noblewoman from a distant empire, pretending to be eager to meet the warriors of the north. She chose every word with special care, carefully constructing her speech so that it would sound perfect to her interlocutor. This made her communication especially convincing and appropriate. The girl wanted to make sure and asked again whether the princess really agreed to teach her how to use a bow, because it seemed something incredible. The princess, without losing her friendliness, confirmed with a smile that of course she would be happy to help her and teach her everything necessary. Rosica quickly added that she had simply been too excited, which was why she had spoken so hastily. She apologized for this, considering her reaction inappropriate. However, the princess only gently noted that there was nothing wrong with it and saw no reason to apologize. She was not at all embarrassed by such emotions. Then Rosica, after thinking for a moment, noticed that the title Queen would suit the princess much more than just princess. Hearing this, the princess asked in surprise whether she had really just said something like that. Then she laughed, and Rosica asked with fear if she had been tactless again towards Her Majesty and the royal family. The princess asked with slight bewilderment why Rosica apologized so often. Such words did not bother her at all, which meant there was no need to worry. Rosica said with relief that she was very happy about this. In any case, she always thought that the princess looked even more majestic because of her height. However, she herself would like her hand to be at least a little bigger in size. The princess, smiling, said that if Rosica called her small, then this only emphasizes how sweet and charming she is. Rosica was surprised to notice that no one had ever said that to her before, and the Duke, watching all this, was pleased with how her plan was going. However, despite this, he could not understand why all this irritated him so much, causing him to experience internal discomfort. If she was going to behave this way, then perhaps it would be worthwhile to do without his participation and simply seduce her yourself. At that moment the prince appeared and politely greeted both the princess and Rosica, attracting the attention of everyone present. It was the first in line to the throne of the kingdom of Ravita, Prince Haram. His status made his appearance especially significant. Rosica had no particular desire to see him, but not wanting to seem rude, she smiled politely and said that it was a great honor for her to meet him. The guy looked around carefully and was surprised to see that the empire was full of really beautiful girls. Compared to what he was used to, this was a pleasant discovery. He was especially happy to see such a lovely princess in front of him, because all his life he had been surrounded by tall and awkward ladies who were not even close to this graceful person. After these thoughts, the Duke confidently stepped forward and stood right in front of Princess Rosica. His gaze was calm, but at the same time studying, as if he was trying to read something in her face. He did not waste time on unnecessary talk, and briefly stated that unnecessary words were not needed here. Everything was crystal clear as it was. The Crown Prince was clearly pleased to see the Duke. He noted with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time, since the time they had suppressed the rebellion together. He sincerely thanked the Duke for the invitation, to which the Duke in turn nodded reservedly, expressing gratitude that the prince had arrived. However, the Duke then added that such a manner of communication with the girl was completely inappropriate. This was not a battlefield, and one should behave accordingly. The prince laughed, taking the hint, and quickly apologized if his words might have sounded rude. The Duke, however, only shrugged, noting that he was not going to dictate how the prince should speak to him, but it was better not to use such expressions in relation to the girl. The Crown Prince apologized again, this time more seriously. He admitted that perhaps he had been rude to the princess, and since he was in the empire, he should behave as befitted its honorable citizens. He admitted that he was only well acquainted with the Archduke, which was why he allowed himself such a casual tone. He would not have dared to speak so unceremoniously with others. In addition, he noticed that if someone who did not know the Duke heard him called a savage, he would easily believe it. There was something rough, almost wild about him, that the prince liked so much. He seemed like a man of his own kind. Suddenly, as if to himself, he added thoughtfully that it seemed to him that the princess had shown interest in military actions. It was unexpected but curious. The prince continued recalling how they lined up the rebels who dared to raise a hand against them, and then slowly and methodically flayed the skin off each of them. Rosika tensed. She realized that the prince again did not realize where he was and to whom he was saying such things. Without thinking, she grabbed his hand sharply and ordered him to stop immediately. Then, softening a little, she apologized for his words and asked those around him to be understanding of his complete lack of upbringing. The Duke nodded calmly, agreeing with the prince. He knew better than anyone what a life of battle meant, having spent many years on the battlefield himself. These battles had hardened him, and so he understood what was being said. The Crown Prince, on the other hand, looked slightly puzzled. He saw nothing terrible in what had happened, and wondered why his sister was acting so seriously. It seemed to him that she was attaching too much importance to the situation. Rosika immediately cut off his thoughts, telling him to shut his mouth. Her father, Duke Regzide, only nodded approvingly, fully supporting his daughter. His gaze showed that she had said exactly what was needed. The greeting had already dragged on, and everyone knew it. Deciding not to drag out the formalities, they agreed to end the conversation. The Duke invited the guests to get comfortable, thus indicating that they could now relax. After that, Rosika turned to the Crown Prince, clearly about to say something important. Her gaze took on a concentrated expression, and her lips were ready to utter carefully chosen words. Before she spoke, however, she turned to the butler. There was a note of concern in her voice as she asked if everything was all right. Owen seemed pleasantly surprised by the attention and smiled and replied that he was very pleased. He began to talk about the palace, its traditions, and how the royal family had reacted to Rosika's arrival. According to him, the princess and the courtiers had been talking about her almost non-stop, clearly impressed. They had only arrived here half an hour ago, and already Rosika had managed to conquer those present. This realization pleasantly warmed her soul. At that moment, the Duke entered, and looking at her, suggested that she might have felt afraid. She immediately asked what they were talking about, her brows slightly furrowed. The Duke explained that he thought she was frightened by the scene with the skinning, or whatever they called it. There was a hint of irony in his voice. However, Rosika, without the slightest hesitation, replied that if that was what he meant, she was not at all afraid. There was a slight mockery in her tone, as if the matter was not even worth discussing. The Duke sighed and clarified that she shouldn't misunderstand him. He had indeed gone there to stop the rebel army, but the whole skinning thing was complete nonsense and had nothing to do with the truth. According to the official version, the rebel troops were destroyed by the army of the kingdom. At that time, this foolish prince was at the head of their forces, and that is why he was now spreading such rumors. Judging by Rosika's face, Prince Harem's words had hurt her, but he added as if by chance that he did not enjoy the process of skinning at all, and he did not like to laugh at such moments either. Rosika looked at the Duke with curiosity, noticing how zealously he was justifying himself. Of course, she had long known about his bloody exploits. Hundreds of enemy heads left on the battlefields spoke for themselves. The Duke tried to explain, but the girl only calmly noted that he did not need to try so hard to look good in front of her. She was not one to be surprised by cruelty or military merit. Sighing, she added indifferently that she saw in him a man accustomed to cutting lice without thinking. Everyone knew that he had no hesitation in killing, and she was certainly not surprised by it. The Duke chuckled and did not deny her words. Of course, he was not completely insensitive, but in general, yes, he was, as Rosika described him. He had no need to hide his nature. The butler, Owen, observing their conversation cheerfully, interjected that the girl should not make fun of the gentleman so cruelly, otherwise he would soon burst into tears. Rosika, turning her head, slightly mockingly asked the Duke if he was trying to outdo Prince Har in impressing her. It seemed he was trying too hard. She had always thought that talk of the wild nature of the royal family of that state was a thing of the past. But now she could not understand what was going on with this prince. What was going on in his head? It would seem that a man should be ashamed of his barbaric past, but this fool, on the contrary, is proud of it. He openly extols the fact that his ancestors were wild and merciless. It feels like time has turned back, like they are going back to their roots. This could be a problem. However, the decision was made to keep these people close and try to win them over. But if this prince suddenly decides to enter the central political arena, they will only face evil looks and mistrust. Not everyone is ready to accept him with his barbaric heritage. However, among the inhabitants of that state, there are now almost no people left who hate the people of the empire. Times are changing, and the boundaries between peoples are becoming increasingly blurred. However, if it so happens that such a person becomes the next ruler, the situation may become more complicated. The king is clearly worried that in the eyes of the world, his state will again appear as a gathering of savages. As far as Ravita knew, the king had originally had 18 children, princes and princesses, but eventually they were all killed by himself, leaving only one heir. Here's how you can expand each paragraph while maintaining the original plot and context. The butler, noticing that she was hesitating, asked her again if she meant that the royal family had other children besides the prince and princess. The duke, in response, confirmed this without hesitation. The king of Ravita was known for his strict position on morality and honor. He did not forgive anyone whose actions could weaken the authority of the palace. The image of the royal family was the most important value for him. Because of this, he went to extreme measures and took the lives of his own children, believing that their savage nature and unstable behavior threatened the authority of the family. This decision was dictated by his desire to maintain the prestige of the royal power. In this situation, Ravita thought that perhaps they should reconsider their actions and change their approach to solving the problem. This could be the key to successfully overcoming the crisis. The duke was pleased with her thought and in some way hoped that it meant that he would no longer have to utter such cruel words and phrases as he had spoken to the princess. This relief was visible on his face, but Ravita looked at him and, not understanding what he meant, said that he would have to increase his efforts to seduce her. Her words left the duke puzzled because she was not going to back down. The duke was taken aback by her answer. He quickly noticed that she was speaking of strategy, but he couldn't figure out how exactly that should affect his actions. He had expected a different approach, but her words left him stumped. She replied that this was precisely why he should be even closer to the princess. After all, her goal was to make him act decisively and be more decisive in his actions. This clearly eluded the duke. The girl insistently advised him to go immediately and invite the princess for a walk in the garden. But the duke, it seemed, was not quite ready for this. For some reason, he did not want to follow her instructions. Ravita, not understanding his resistance, insistently ordered him to go faster. She was puzzled by his refusal, because for her it was an obvious step. She could not understand why he was so reluctant to agree. The duke, feeling that the situation was getting out of control, asked for at least a minute to calm down a little mentally. This was his attempt to collect his thoughts before meeting the princess again. However, the girl, who had already decided everything for him, slammed the door, not giving him a second to think. The duke, sighing, went to carry out her order. This was the moment when he realized that he could not stop her determination. As they hid in the bushes, the butler, clearly unsure of their actions, asked again if they really should follow this plan. He was not sure if this was the right way, but he continued to follow the instructions. The lady replied that the situation reminded her of a small child who is afraid to go into the water. He stands on the shore but does not dare to take a step. She was ready to move forward, not paying attention to her fears. Now they were moving forward, despite the danger, and Ravita told them to duck so they wouldn't be seen. This was an important part of her plan, and she knew their success depended on every little step. The butler, watching them, remarked that they really did look good together. It was a strange, but at the same time obvious observation. They were like two parts of a whole, despite all the complications. Ravita, noticing his gaze, stopped and agreed with his words. However, her face expressed something strange. It was misunderstanding, or perhaps slight displeasure, but she did not reveal it. The Duke asked Rosika to tell him what exactly had changed in her plans. He could not understand what she had in mind and did not know what to do. He tried to understand what was behind her decision. Rosika explained that they needed Ravita, but without Haroma at the helm. She believed that the situation required changes, but at the same time, she understood that the plan should not include people who could ruin everything. The Duke was the heir to the throne, but Rosika told him that if he made a mistake, his father would immediately turn against him. It turned out to be not as difficult as he thought. He just had to be careful. The Duke was interested in what she wanted to do next, and Rosika replied that she had an interesting idea, but in order to implement it, he had to get closer to the princess, understand her better, and find a common language. During a walk with the Duke, the princess noticed that he was talking, as if he was ready to give her something important. This did not go unnoticed by her, and she immediately realized that the matter was not without a secret and a significant gift. The Duke realized that the princess had taken his words in this way, and he confirmed that he really did want to convey something special to her. He was ready to carry out his plan, although his feelings remained mixed. When the girl saw what the Duke was actually going to give her, she was shocked. She saw a smile on his face that did not promise anything good, as if there was some kind of mystery hidden behind it. It was a national treasure of Ravita, which had been obtained during the previous suppression of the rebels and sent to Archduke Rexid, but the girl could not understand why he had decided to return it. The Duke explained that he had no intention of simply returning the treasure, but wanted to give her a gift. His words sounded doubtful, as if he did not fully understand how to present it. However, he could not express his intentions directly. He hesitated, not knowing how to continue. Rosika felt that he would still decide to say that it was a gift for her, and even hang the necklace around her neck. But in the end, the Duke said he was simply returning her treasure, and threw the necklace into her arms. He could not hide his uncertainty, and his actions seemed strange and clumsy to her. The girl was a little surprised, but grateful. She did not expect to receive this treasure again, and said that her father would be happy with such a gift. She noted that this event was unexpected for her. Rosika and the butlers were very disappointed. The Duke had failed in his plan again, but Rosika hoped that at least he could add a few words, a prepared phrase to make everything more convincing. The Duke turned to the princess, his face clearly agitated, his voice a little shaky. He remarked that he wanted to ask her something important. It all seemed strange and awkward. He thought for a moment, and choosing his words, dared to ask if her father was a thief. The question was very unusual, and it caused surprise and confusion in the princess. The girl did not experience the terrible feeling that she could have experienced, but she was still slightly stunned. However, she soon smiled, trying to hide her bewilderment and continue the conversation. After asking again, she wondered why he had to ask such a strange question. The Duke, a little embarrassed, said that these were just his guesses, but he could not explain anything for sure. He was clearly confused, didn't know how to explain his question, or what he was even hinting at. It looked like his words were simply inappropriate, and he himself didn't know what to say. The girl was increasingly at a loss, and asking clarifying questions, tried to understand what exactly the Duke meant. He, in turn, immediately remembered how he had said this to Rosika before. Before, it was just a training moment, but now the situation was completely different. The Duke explained that her father just looked like that, and it was not serious at all, but he said it uncertainly. Rosika and the butler were at that moment completely confused, not knowing how to react to such strange words of the Duke. Both could not understand how to act in this absurd situation. The situation was becoming more and more confusing. The princess asked him in confusion what he meant. His words did not sound logical, and now she was beginning to doubt his sanity. The princess began to think that this Duke must be mad. She could not understand how anyone could say that, and her bewilderment became more and more obvious and pronounced. He asked if her father was a thief and added that he looked like one. This accusation was very strange and puzzled the girl. Her gaze became more and more suspicious. But that's not all. The Duke didn't stop there. He recommended the princess to drink some water, as if that could somehow improve her condition or ease her doubts about his strange words. He tried calling her a flower, but that seemed to confuse her even more. Then he said that maybe she ate too much, and that could be a problem. He seemed out of place in that too. The Duke had never met anyone who ate so much and was worried that she would have indigestion. He urged her to drink some water, hoping that it would help the situation. The girl was furious. He had clearly gone mad, but suddenly Princess Rosica intervened in the conversation, offering her version of what was happening, and this calmed her down a little. Princess Rosica remarked that perhaps her mood had been spoiled by the Duke's strange words during the meal. She was prepared to accept the explanation that everything had happened because of him. The princess said that despite everything she had, indeed, eaten a lot, and therefore was not offended by the Duke's words. She tried to understand his motives and took it with humor. Rosica tried to justify the Duke, claiming that he had not meant to offend her, but had simply been clumsily trying to take care of her. The princess, hearing this, felt relieved and calmed down. The princess thanked Rosica for her understanding and support. She felt that Rosica was not just trying to justify the Duke, but really understood his intentions and helped her not to worry. The princess noticed that Rosica had a really great stance and praised her for it. Rosica in turn thanked her and asked her to show her how to shoot a bow correctly. The girl happily agreed, immediately taking the bow in her hands and demonstrating her skills. She was not one of those who were afraid to show her strength and confidence, and this was noticeable to everyone. Rosica started by saying that her relationship with the prince was not very good, but she apologized if she was wrong about something. This was her way of showing her sincerity and willingness to improve. The princess asked again if Rosica meant Haroma and clarified that their relationship was not that bad. It was just that the prince was too rude to treat her like royalty. Rosica expressed her desire to apologize for what happened, explaining that she and the Duke do not have the best relationship. According to her, she could not have acted differently since it was not her decision. Often there is no common opinion between them, and this situation is no exception. However, the princess always seemed to be quick to hit the nail on the head, expressing her opinion on any issue. Rosica was absolutely delighted and asked to be given a chance to try her eyes, shining with curiosity, as she waited for the princess to agree to her request. The princess didn't object, agreeing to let her try, but Rosica didn't try at all, and the result was far from what she expected. She missed the mark and shrugged, not too upset. She noticed that it wasn't that easy, but the princess replied that she had just picked up a bow too, and for her first time, her result was incredibly good. It felt like a small victory for her. Rosica admitted that during the purge of the rebels, they talked about she herself would have liked to join the army to help fight those who stood against the kingdom. The rebels were those who had not yet recognized the authority of the kingdom and had joined the empire, trying to side with the opponents. These people were especially dangerous. She was sure that her brother Raven would mercilessly blame the rebels for what happened without thinking about the reasons for their actions, because for him, punishment was important, not analysis of the situation. Despite the rebellion, Rosica believed that it was possible to understand the people who organized it. After all, it is not easy to become an intellectual when you have lived your whole life as a savage and suddenly have to change your way of life. Rosica thought that the slow re-education of such people was the kingdom's responsibility, and the princess, of course, agreed with her point of view, sharing the opinion on the importance of this process. Rosica honestly admitted that she thinks that Ravita would rule much better if she became the queen, as she has all the qualities to be worthy of this role. However, the reality was much harsher. To become a queen, you need to have not only a dream, but also the ability to manage, as well as the ability to make difficult decisions in any situation. There are people who were destined to sit on a throne from birth, And even if that throne is not right for them, they are obliged to fulfill their destiny despite all circumstances. In a country where intellectuals often challenge power, coups occur even among the highest levels of society. For example, the crown prince, who is on the throne, is the result of such changes. Emperor Hexen I, the founder of a great empire, left his legacy to his eighth son. Although his reign was full of cruelty and conflict, the son managed to seize the throne, continuing his work. Despite the fact that Hexen II got rid of his brothers, the country experienced many changes under his rule. Many saw him as a cruel ruler, but under his rule the state reached unprecedented heights. For Ravita, and for most, there was no turning back. People had to pay for their actions, and paying for a mistake was not just a punishment, but a matter of life and death. In the future, Prince Haram will undoubtedly not only be crowned, but also become a target for many. His status as a dangerous target cannot be ignored, and there will always be a threat in his path. Rosica, always confident in her skills, believed that the princess would hit the target. She knew that she always hit the very middle, no matter how difficult it was. As the girl watched in amazement, she could not contain her emotions. Without warning, she fired sharply, aiming at the target with incredible accuracy. The kingdom needed a decisive and wise leader who could lead the people to prosperity. Rosica clearly understood the importance of this moment and continued her actions with confidence. With this shot, the girl hit the target, hitting the very center. Her confidence only grew, and she felt that this moment was important for her future. The princess was in complete shock at how quickly everything happened. But Rosica was pleased with herself, knowing that her skills had not failed. She felt that the princess was a real leader. Ravika asked again if it was true that Rosica was doing this for the first time. But the girl calmly reminded that it was the princess who taught her these techniques, and she proudly admitted it. Rosica, with a sly look, noted that despite everything she could already see, what a great leader she would become. She knew that the princess's future was just beginning. Rosica realized that it was not for nothing that she followed the chairman everywhere in her past life. She told the princess that it had been a lot of fun, and the princess also remarked that she would think carefully about what Rosica had said today. Ravita's second in line to the throne is Princess. She deeply loved her homeland. It was clear that she was ready to take responsibility for it. And there was only one problem. She had no thirst for power, but this was fixable. If there's one thing Rosic is a professional at motivating people now, all that's left is to make sure that while the royal family is still in their palace, a situation occurs that would cause the prince to lose his father's support. Rexid needed a strong, high-quality ally to strengthen his position and gain recognition in the Imperial palace. This was a key step in his plans, and allies were more important than ever. He did not want Ravit, who was subservient to a cruel prince. Rosica, knowing that he did not need such allies, decided that it was best to start with a provocation to bring everything to light. A walk through the corridors led her to a maid who stood there bursting into tears. Rosica was puzzled, not understanding what could have happened to cause such a reaction. The maid looked confused, and Rosica couldn't understand what had happened. Many thoughts flashed through her head, but she couldn't find an answer to this question, looking at her exhausted face. And at that moment, Rosica heard the sharp cry of the prince, who was angry and shouting that the girl had completely lost her mind. The cry was filled with rage, and her attention immediately switched to the situation. He didn't mince words, and when he saw Rosica, he became even more frightened. His reaction was so unexpected that Rosica felt the tension in the air immediately become palpable. Rosica, without losing her composure, approached the maid and asked what had happened. She could not understand what had made the girl cry and look so worried. The maids always taught her how to behave with nobles, especially princes, and she probably decided that there was no need to go into further explanations. But her silence only made the situation worse. Perhaps she thought that if she started explaining, it would only complicate everything and make the situation even more confusing. The maid tried to hide her worries, but Rosika noticed her hesitation. Finally, the maid replied that nothing had happened. Rosika, not satisfied with this answer, said that she needed to talk to the prince alone, and the maid could go. The maid was so taken aback that she asked her mistress if she was mistaken. She had not expected that Rosika was so determined to talk to the prince. Rosika, looking at her carefully, asked if any of their servants had really behaved unworthily, breaking tact with His Highness. This worried her. The prince, holding back his anger, noted that despite the maid's mistakes, she had fulfilled her duties, and he forgave her. His words were clear and confident, which immediately relieved some of the tension. Rosika also apologized and added that she would train the maids herself in the future. But for now, the maid could go. She would decide for herself what to do with this situation without interfering in other people's affairs. All this happened because the lady came here with the intention of talking to the prince alone, not wanting to involve anyone in their conversation. Her decision was absolutely clear. The maid, not knowing what to do, tried to persuade Rosika to give up her plan. But Rosika was firm in her decision and suggested that she go with her if she was so worried. Rosika smiled, appreciating that this maid was much more intelligent and loyal than she had expected. This behavior made her look at her with new respect. The lady was interested in the girl's name, and she answered with a smile that her name was Lila. This name apparently did not surprise the lady, who listened to her attentively. Layla, turning to the lady, suggested that if she wished to speak with His Highness, it would be better to postpone the conversation until the moment when the Duke was nearby, as this would be more appropriate. The lady nodded, agreeing with Layla's opinion. She noted that if nothing significant had really happened in this room, there was nothing to worry about, and they could continue. She suggested that Layla go inside without any fear, because if everything is calm, she can go in and continue the conversation. This decision seemed quite logical and correct. The prince, noticing how Layla was behaving in his room, could not help but ask what was so important. She wanted to say he was surprised by her determination and actions. Rosika chuckled and noted that it would be a bit awkward if someone noticed them. She was already getting annoyed that she had to use formalities when communicating with the prince when she could be more frank. The prince was completely confused and could not understand what she meant. He did not expect such a frank approach and was at a loss, not knowing how to react to her words. Rosika, noticing his bewilderment, asked again whether she really had to repeat her phrase. In her opinion, the prince clearly wanted her to remain silent, despite the fact that she had no intention of doing so. She advised the prince not to worry about his perception problems. They were his problems, not hers. He became very angry, but Rosika remained calm, ignoring his anger. The girl could not hold back her emotions and called the prince a bastard, explaining that people like him with such thoughts and behavior are real problems for society. Rosika continued that if the prince was unable to think normally, he should just get out of the way and not interfere. Her words were direct and unvarnished, which obviously angered him even more. The prince shouted in rage that she was behaving this way because she did not understand who he really was. He was sure that she would not remain without consequences for such behavior. He claimed that the Duke would likely put up with any of her antics and might even justify her actions, which only added to his confidence in his right to power. Rosika, not paying attention to his words, asked what business it was of his. There were only the two of them in the room, and she did not care what he thought or what he might tell the Duke. Rosika noted with a slight mockery that she was probably perceived as a caned and naive lady who couldn't even catch a bug, or as a hooligan who hadn't yet learned to be restrained. Rosika had been so kind as to invite this wild man in. She had treated him as a guest, which meant that he had to behave decently since he was already there. Only with such behavior will he be shown respect and perceived differently. She patted his face without hesitation, asking if this man understood who he was and that he should act accordingly. This made him even more angry, and he raised his hand, preparing to hit her, unable to contain his anger. However, the next moment she opened her eyes and saw the Duke in front of her, who coldly asked the prince if he wished to end his life right here. Rosika thought about it. She wished he had hit her at least once, because that would have been a much better outcome. The Duke, having tolerated all his absurd speeches from the very beginning, said that now the prince had crossed all the boundaries of what was permissible, and apparently decided to test how much he could tolerate everything. The prince, unable to bear it, began to shout that he had only seen her swinging at him, while all this was simply a harmless gesture, like a slap in the face. He, as the future King Ravita, was offended that this girl dared to hit him, despite his status, because he was the heir to the throne. Rosika replied that if anyone heard about it, they would think that he stood still and did nothing, and that she simply slapped him. He replied that he simply found her funny, calling her a little fox, and did not understand why she was behaving this way now, and not the way she had before. Rosika tried to explain to the Duke why she did this, but he did not listen to her explanation, claiming that she could have hit him because of her mood or for some other reason. The girl was completely shocked by the Duke's words, not expecting that he would take her actions so calmly and even justify them. The Duke said that if she had struck the prince, he should have accepted it and taken the blow without making a scene or making any claims. The prince asked if they really thought he would just turn a blind eye to this and not actually avenge the insult. The Duke, with obvious interest, asked again whether the prince was seriously threatening now and what he was going to do about it, if he still had the courage. Rexid was curious, but at the same time sad, that he would not be able to find out how it would end if the prince did nothing while he was still alive. Rosika tried to stop the Duke when he started to pull something out of his jacket. She couldn't understand what he was going to do, and immediately felt that the situation was becoming dangerous. She decided to ask him a question. Should she really just stand there and watch him abuse the maid? She didn't like the Duke's words, and she wasn't going to keep quiet. Rosika responded by saying that she did not feel she had crossed a line by expressing her displeasure. She was sure that she had done the right thing by intervening in what was happening and did not regret it. The prince, smiling, said that in his opinion she was still too young and did not understand what was happening. Girls, as he said, were needed for this, especially for soldiers, as they were with His Highness. The Duke, hearing these words, angrily ordered the prince to shut his mouth. He was irritated that the prince was so frank in expressing his point of view without thinking about how it looked to others. The prince seemed not to notice the threat and continued to speak. He even told how many girls he had sent to the prince's hut when they were fighting against the rebels. These words left Rosika with no choice. He added mockingly that he did not believe that the Duke was so petty as to spare one useless girl for the sake of a comrade. These words, like a knife, pierced Rosika's soul. She did not expect such cruelty. The Duke, unable to restrain himself, grabbed the prince and slapped him across the face. He was ready to teach him a lesson, knowing that he could not let such behavior go without consequences. The prince fell, but the Duke showed no mercy. The prince found himself on the ground, his face badly damaged. The Duke looked at him and asked if he understood why he was being punished. His gaze was hard, and his words were the same. The Duke, having said these words, continued his actions. He took a dagger from his jacket, deciding to finish the job. Rosika watched the events from the corner of her eye, hoping that everything would end without further casualties. This time the Duke was determined to be symmetrical. He was going to cut the prince on the other side to make his face even more disfigured. His eyes were blazing with anger, and he was determined. Rosika could not remain silent any longer. She cried out, asking the Duke to stop these cruel actions. She could not understand why he continued to mock the prince, despite the fact that everything had already gone too far. When the prince tried to get up, he noticed that 2 of his teeth had fallen out. It was a moment that left him stunned. He had not thought that the fight would lead to such consequences and was shocked by what had happened. The prince was in complete shock. He did not expect such injuries to be so serious. He stood there not knowing how to react and wondered how he could get out of this situation with such injuries. The Duke, noticing the situation, chuckled and noted that the prince had spoken in front of the girl about how they had skinned the rebels. These words were cold and cynical, like the Duke himself, who did not feel the slightest regret. He realized that he had to use his mind, and remembering everything, he gave a clear answer. The answer was clear and decisive. His thoughts were clear, and he explained at once. The Duke began to ask if he had touched any of the women who had been sent to him. He noted that he had sent several ladies to him for an answer. The Duke demanded an explanation of what he had done to the women. He warned that if the man remained silent, the consequences could be very serious next time. Rosica was confused. She couldn't understand why the Duke started the conversation with such a strange accent and asked such questions. It seemed absurd to her. She thought that now was not the time to delve into such trifles, and decided that it was better to concentrate on more important things, ignoring the Duke's words. However, the Duke continued to insist, saying that it was important to him, and asked her to give an answer. Rosica felt that she could not avoid this conversation. The prince was beside himself with rage. He said that the Duke was only bragging about not being able to take advantage of his chance, despite the fact that everything was handed to him on a silver platter. In response, the prince said that the man seemed to have not yet come to his senses, and could not move from the spot even after everything was offered to him. The rage in his voice was obvious. Apparently, there was only one way that Rosica could choose to solve everything. She decided to intervene and try to resolve the situation, despite its complexity. She said that if he puts a woman on the same level with things and continues to behave that way, then he is not only rude, but also a truly stupid person. The prince asked her what she meant, and Rosica responded by asking if the thing hanging between his legs even worked. The question was direct and bold. The prince became furious, again, not understanding what she was trying to say. He asked what she meant by that question, still trying to figure out her intentions. Rosica explained that men like him, who can only talk, have one thing in common. They are powerless, unable to fulfill their responsibilities, and looking for excuses. She called him a piece of trash who, despite his insignificance, tries to show off as if he has something incredible, which in fact he does not. It was more of a self-defense instinct, although she had no intention of delving into his problems at first, but apparently it caught her attention, and she felt some curiosity. She expressed her opinion that women avoided him because he was impotent. After that, she told the Duke outright that the Prince of Ravita had in fact been impotent all his life. The prince could not stand it, and began to shout that it was a lie, and that he could show that everything was not. So Rosica ran up to the Duke and declared that he seemed to have gone completely mad. The Duke only confirmed her words, noting that this man seemed to have truly gone mad, and did not understand how he could do such a thing right here in front of everyone. The prince cried out that she had started it, but Rosica calmly replied that judging by his reaction, she must have been right. This clearly offended him, and he could not hide his displeasure. In fact, Rosica was sure that Ravita's heir was impotent. She was wondering what interesting story she could share with the northern aristocrats who would come to visit them. She thought that there was nothing funnier than this situation, and it would be amusing to tell them what a ridiculous and weak man stood in the way of the throne. For members of the royal family talk about their sexual functions, whether true or not, has always been an Achilles' heel, a weak spot they try to hide. Therefore, Rosica was sure that the harems would probably not take risks, and would try their best to avoid such topics. She suggested that the prince argue with her. She put one vote on his apparatus not working, and if it suddenly turned out that everything was fine, she promised to apologize to him. She asked him to kneel down. The prince, not understanding why she wanted to do this, asked what the point was in him kneeling down before her. The princess asked what exactly he would get if she knelt before him. Her question was not so much a challenge as an attempt to understand his motives. But the girl corrected him, saying that it was not she, but the Duke himself who would have to kneel before him. The princess was ready to consider this as his obligation. If that wasn't enough, she suggested another idea. Let him give her a title, she could become the Duke of the Draxx Empire, gaining power and influence. Rosika was sure that he would definitely react now, and perhaps even get angry. She expected to see how his patience and pride would be tested. However, the Duke, surprising her, calmly agreed. He said that he agreed with the proposal and that they would do exactly as she suggested. The prince, noticing how the situation was developing, came closer and asked if Rosika was really sure of her decision. He doubted her firmness. Rosika, without hesitation, replied that she was completely sure. Everything would be verified in 2 days, when the aristocrats would arrive to witness her words. The prince noticed that she might be planning to send the assassin to her place within those 2 days. He wondered what to do if she changed her mind later. The girl, with a slight smile, noticed that everyone around him was the same as him, and took off the ring. She asked if he knew what this object was hinting at its meaning. She asked him not to act hastily, but he put the ring on his finger without thinking. It was his decision, and he had no intention of backing down.